evening. Tonight is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and I call this meeting to order. The Orange County Schools Board of Education pledges to our families, students, staff, and the greater community to conduct our business in a courteous and productive manner, showing respect for fellow board members, staff, and citizens. The board asks its citizens to conduct themselves with the same courtesy towards all staff members and each other. As per board policy, Robert's Rules of Order will be used to conduct meetings. Following the Pledge of Allegiance, a moment of silence will be observed before we begin our business. Public comment will be held after the board adopts tonight's agenda. The board also asks that you check your cell phones and other electronic devices to be sure that they are turned off or on vibrate in order to avoid disruptions during the meeting. If you would, please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
As we begin our work this evening, I would like to recognize that Orange County Schools was established on land previously settled by the ancestors of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation. This board has made a commitment to honor and respect the heritage of Indigenous and all members of our OCS community, to work to undo decades of racial harm, and to build, to the best of our ability, a community that fosters a sense of belonging for all of our students so that they may thrive and succeed. Please join me now for a moment of silence. Thank you. We have special guests this evening, and Dr. Felder, I will turn it over to you for our recognitions.
Thank you so much, Chair Doyle, and good evening, Vice Chair Stevens, to the entire board, to our students, our staff, and our families. I'm going to borrow the words of, where is she? Mrs. Hatcher, our Chief of Human Capital, went to say that I am super duper excited tonight. She's always super duper excited. Well, I'm super duper excited tonight because tonight we get to celebrate and recognize our 2021-2022 Orange County Teachers of the Year. And so as you can imagine, these outstanding classroom teachers excel in many things. For example, they promote excellence in teaching. They are creative and innovative. They are committed to children. They're committed to teaching. They're committed to learning. They show continual growth as professional educators. And they are committed to the community. And so they support and participate in a number of service-oriented activities. And they demonstrate, which is so important, they demonstrate outstanding character by modeling positive and professional behavior, not some of the time, but all of the time. And so tonight we want to recognize our 14 Teacher of the Years. So, and we're going to do that by inviting each of them to stand up and come forward, and we'll recognize them that way, and then board give you an opportunity if you have any words to share. But if you're wondering, well, how does one get to be a Teacher of the Year? Well, you have to have 3 years of experience, and one of those years has to be in Orange County Schools, so check that box, they meet that criteria. They are all certified, of course, and they can be nominated only by certified staff. And so they can nominate themselves, they can be nominated by teachers, other teachers, principals, assistant principals, etc. The winner at each school is determined using the democratic process of voting, with the classroom teacher receiving the most votes being identified as the Teacher of the Year for their school. So we are so grateful again that most of our Teacher of the Years are here tonight. And so I would like for us to begin to recognize each and every single one of them. So next slide, please. And so we're going to begin by recognizing Melanie Von Bronze. And she is the Teacher of the Year at A.L. Standback Middle School. So Melanie, there she is. Wonderful. Let's give her a round of applause. Not to wait till we get them all up. And then we'll do a big rousing applause at the end. Next, we want to celebrate Melinda Barnhart. She is the Teacher of the Year at Cedar Ridge High School. Right. Next, we want to recognize Stephanie Richards-Lee, Teacher of the Year at Central Elementary School. Next, we want to recognize Megan Patrizzi. She is the Teacher of the Year at Eflin Cheeks Global Elementary School. Next up is Shannon Floyd. Shannon is Teacher of the Year at Grady A. Brown Elementary School. Next, we want to recognize Logan Parker. So Logan is the Teacher of the Year at Gravely Hill Middle School. Next up is Beth Riley. She is the Teacher of the Year at Hillsborough Elementary School. Next would be Abby Allred. Abby is the Teacher of the Year at New Hope Elementary School. Next, we want to recognize Amanda Strong. Amanda Strong is the Teacher of the Year at Orange High School. Next up would be Mark Harrington, and Mark is the Teacher of the Year at Orange Middle School. Next up is Kimberly Harshaw. Kimberly is the Teacher of the Year at Pathways Elementary School. And next, we want to recognize Jeremy Wilson. Jeremy Wilson is the Teacher of the Year at Partnership Academy. And next, we want to recognize Katie Enrico. She is the Teacher of the Year at River Park Elementary School. So congratulations to all of our Teachers of the Year. And at this time, board, if you have comments or any congratulatory remarks that you'd like to make, we're going to open up the board for that.
Go ahead, Dr. Moore.
Congratulations to each of you. I support each of you and thank you for your dedication. And to Ms. Floyd, I just want to say, once a cougar, always a cougar.
That's fun. Bonnie?
Sure.
I can't imagine a greater honor than to be recognized by your peers, so congratulations.
Just a huge congratulations and deepest of thank yous as a board member, as a parent. Y'all are the people who are changing my children's lives and the lives of the kids in this district every day, and I'm so, so thankful for you.
Well, congratulations all around to all of you, and to one of you specifically, I am so glad that you changed careers and went into teaching, because you used to work at the library with me, and I'm glad that you left, because teaching, you found your niche, so I'm really happy that that happened. And again, congratulations all around, everyone.
Congratulations, all of you. Thank you for taking the time to celebrate with us. I know you're working so hard all day and all week long, and special shout out to Ms. Harshaw, who is all of my kids' kindergarten teacher. It's so great to get to celebrate you tonight.
Yeah, that's who I was talking about.
Just a big congratulations and thank you to everyone on the hard work front. These couple of years have been incredibly, incredibly challenging. I cannot imagine being a teacher during this time, and just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Congratulations, all of you. It is so wonderful to actually see you in person.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not through a video screen. And just wanted to say thank you for what you do every day. You are the front lines. You make the difference every day here. And thank you so much.
Great.
believe they have a special picture that they're taking on the front steps of the building. Oh, great, yeah. Thank you all again.
Thank you all for coming out.
All right. Well, our Teachers of the Year were the one and only recognition for tonight. So that concludes our recognitions for the evening. And bye to our little friend. Aw, you can stay. Right. Like children.
You can sneak into the picture. Are we ready, Dr. Felder,
We
for
are.
agenda adoption? Do I have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
A motion from Ms. McKenzie and a second from Mr. Atherton. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Now is the time for public comments. However, I'm not sure that we have anybody here. Do we know for sure? Melanie?
She went out.
Oh, she went out.
Take the picture.
I know we had 2 people sign up, but they weren't present.
What's he gonna do, pull somebody off the street?
I'm going to go ahead and read this while Mr. Obley's out there. Now is the time for public comment. After each speaker has been recognized, they will have 3 minutes to speak. The board will not have a discussion with any speaker. No profane or vulgar language will be permitted, nor personal abuse against any person. Any speaker that uses threatening language will not be permitted to continue. Public comment should not address any specific confidential student or personnel matter. Complaints concerning any specific employee or students are not permissible during public comment. Speakers must conclude their remarks at the end of their 3 minutes.
He said no one.
Oh, great, okay. Moving right along, it's time to talk about the consent agenda. We have 5 items on our consent agenda this evening. We have the minutes, we have our personnel report tonight, we have NCDPI grant funding for OCS athletics, a contract extension for pest control services, and a 2021-22 budget amendment. Are there any items that board members would like to move to the regular agenda for further discussion?
I
Go ahead,
don't,
Ms. Fenn.
I don't want to move anything to the regular agenda, but I just have a comment on one of them. Which is the grant funding for OCS athletics. And I was just really pleased to see that we had received this grant to do some of this maintenance on our athletic facilities. I think that's wonderful. I had not noticed before us getting a grant like that, so it was happy to see that.
And I think we're giving a shout out to Mr. Foster.
Shout out to Mr. Foster. Thank
All
you.
right, Mr. Thank you so much. We use that money for celebrating our women athletes. Although that was covered too. That was corporate sponsored. Okay. Any other
Motion.
items that board members would like to move? Okay, Will?
Motion to approve.
Second?
All right. Motion for Mr. Atherton, a second from Ms. Stevens. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is time for our one discussion action item. Would you like to start that, Dr. Felder, or did you want me to go ahead and?
Okay. Are
So-
you okay with it?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is, as board members, we received a communication from the North Carolina School Boards Association, and it's the opportunity for each local school board to nominate one of its members to serve on NCSBA's legislative committee. The application deadline is tomorrow, and we were instructed to vote in open session, so that's why we're doing that tonight. The primary task of the legislative committee is to develop the draft NCSBA legislative agenda for consideration and adoption by the delegate assembly. The committee is comprised of a subset of the NCSBA board of directors and at-large applicants representing the 8 education districts. The at-large members are selected by the NCSBA president. And so I was going to ask Vice Chair Stevens, who has served on the legislative committee.
Right, and I still am serving, but what I would like to say is there are 3 meetings that will be held prior to the delegate assembly, and it's just imperative that the person that we nominate is able to do that. However, it's not a guarantee, of course, that the person will be appointed to the legislative committee. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just describing.
Oh, all right,
I
well,
had some
it's like an
questions,
auction.
but keep
All right,
going.
don't move your hands anymore.
going.
It's like an auction. You move your hand, you get called on. Well, then, in that, Madam Chair, if I would like to suggest, nominate, recommend that you serve as the name that moves forward to North Carolina School Boards Association, knowing that it's not a guarantee that the name will be, so that would be a motion.
Okay, thank you. I am willing to serve.
It's
Further
short.
discussion?
I have several questions. So you're serving now,
Yeah, but the meetings are,
and the meetings are when?
one is in July, one is in September. I can't open it, but none before the end of the school year. Maybe
Right,
July.
like the first one was in July. and then there
July
were two in the
is
fall.
when it starts. And then one in July, one in September, and the three of them will happen before November, because that's when the delegate assembly is gonna happen.
Okay.
Conference in
The
Greensboro.
conference, in Greensboro.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I just said, I'm just a little bit uncomfortable for this board to be designating the representation when a new board is going to be seated in a couple of months. So I'm just,
Yeah, well, they need everyone in place before, like, the new board who gets seated will be in July, and they wouldn't have had an opportunity to get their feet wet, so to speak.
but
The deadline is tomorrow.
I understand, but you're serving through you could serve through the
Yeah.
end of your term, and could we make a decision to change you out?
Yeah.
Because the question is not who would serve from the new board, it's giving the new board a chance to decide who represents them.
Brenda's serving in another capacity. Is
Correct.
that right?
I'm
It's not-
serving as a past president.
She's not the liaison for our board.
Chair Doyle.
Serving as the president of the North Carolina School Boards Association.
Chair Doyle, can I, just a point of clarification, see now I forget what the point of clarification was. But so the deadline to apply to be on this committee is tomorrow.
Correct.
And representatives will be selected from each district of the state. And so whoever, if we were to nominate someone, then they may or may not be
Correct.
selected to even be on the committee.
Correct.
But the deadline's tomorrow.
Yep.
And would the board have an opportunity to change, if we wanted to
No.
change the representation once we
No.
designate it?
But the voters of Orange County put all 7 of us in place, so whoever gets,
I understand that, Hillary. The voters of Orange, I understand that.
Go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say, it makes sense for the people not up for election to be nominated, and that way there wouldn't
Right,
be
right.
any
Absolutely.
discontinuity, I think.
That was
Would
my
be a
motive.
fair, since the
Totally.
requirement is
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Narrows it down.
And that was my point also.
Well, I'll just say, I am totally fine seconding that motion and moving forward with one of the members who would certainly be serving on the board, on the next board, representing us.
Go ahead, Will.
So I just have a question, because this is the first time it's come here to the board, and my being on the board for this. How would we as a board stay in connection to what's being reviewed and giving input or thoughts and sharing that? I just curious how we would do that, because we've never done it before. Is it the representative would say, here are the things coming up, what are the thoughts, without doing an electronic meeting? And,
Yeah.
especially when it's during summer.
Right.
I think Ms. Stevens is probably best to answer that, but I recall in past board comments, you would say, we had a meeting of the legislative committee, and
Correct.
here are the things we were discussing, and if you have any feedback. Like, I remember you saying things like
Yeah.
that, so.
You just, and as I said, it didn't come before you because I got there because I was the president of the North Carolina School Boards Association.
If I understand Will's question, I think the question is, we as a board have never established our own legislative priorities that we want represented to the School Boards Association. So we could be a member of the committee, but I think if somebody's going to represent us on the committee, they should represent our priorities to make sure that they get considered
Right.
on the
And so
agenda. We just never talked about that.
Right. Last year, in advance of the conference, we would get updates about what the draft legislative agenda is. But I don't know that we would get, because we didn't have someone.
Right.
Because you were
Right.
serving in another capacity, it wasn't our board representative. So there were updates in advance of the conference, but I don't know how early they were.
If I could just make one more point about that, I think if someone were selected as one of these at-large members, they would be representing all of the school districts of their region, not just Orange County schools. And so
Right.
there's an opportunity there, in that process, in some years, we've gotten like a survey, which of these issues are very important to you as a board member, where we as individually as board members provide feedback to NCSBA about what is important to us individually as board members, but they're not, it's not sort of a one-to-one where they're representing specifically our
That's a good
district's
point.
priorities.
Eva, were you gonna?
Madam
We
Chair,
have a
there's
motion that's
on the
seconded,
floor.
so
Right. There's a motion on the floor, Madam Chair.
any further comments before we call the vote? Okay. Sarah seconded.
I seconded it.
Yep, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you. And I will be sure to communicate in a timely manner any
If
opportunities.
you're selected.
If selected. That's right.
That's
I
right.
think they told us, is it 40? There are 115 districts.
Yeah,
And it's like,
it's a big group. Last time I did it was a
but it's
Zoom.
not more than 40 or something. So
Right.
it's like 1 in 3 chance of getting selected.
Yeah, 1 in 3.
Okay.
Better than the lottery.
Yeah, okay. So that was our only discussion action item. So I will pass it to Dr. Felder to,
Thank you so much,
for team.
Chair Doyle. And so I started to say, as Mrs. Rath, Chief Finance Officer, makes her way to the podium, but ta-da, she's
There.
already here. Tonight, the board will have an opportunity to provide feedback on and identify what you wish to go forward to the commissioners as the board approved local operating budget for the 2022-2023 school year. But before the board decision ensues, Mrs. Rath will provide a review of the budget timeline and the superintendent's recommended budget. Then she will pause to allow for public comment by anyone who signed up to speak for this public hearing, and then she will open it up to the board for discussion. So any questions about how this agenda item will proceed? Mrs. Rath.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So on March the 7th, the superintendent's fiscal year 2023 recommended local operating budget was presented to the board as an information item. This evening is the opportunity for any person who wishes to be heard on the budget to comment. If you recall, in early January, the following timeline was presented surrounding the fiscal year 2023 budget and how the classified compensation study factored into the budget process. Classified employees are employees that do not hold a professional education certificate, i.e. a teacher or administrator license, or are employed in a position that does not require such certification. Some examples of who this encompasses, and this is not an exhaustive list, is teacher assistants, custodians, school bookkeepers, data managers, receptionists, skilled tradespeople, and administrative assistants. As you recall, the recommended compensation study included decompressing the current pay scales and implementing a 1.5% step increase for each year of experience. A majority of the staff in these positions have not seen a pay increase in over 8 years. The superintendent's recommended budget includes a per pupil request to fund the compensation study as recommended, as well as providing state years of service credit for district certified staff when computing local supplement pay. This is a change from the current procedure, which is certified supplements are based on years of service in the Orange County Schools District. This evening, the board will discuss its priorities surrounding the fiscal year 2023 local budget and provide feedback on those items that they wish to be incorporated in the budget requests that will be submitted to the county commissioners. At the April 11th meeting, the board will approve a fiscal year 2023 local operating budget that will then be submitted to the Board of County Commissioners. April 28th, Orange County Schools and Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools will present the local operating budget request to the commissioners. The county manager will then follow up with a recommended budget which will include the recommended per pupil funding for both school systems. Budget public hearings will then be held and are currently scheduled May the 10th and June the 2nd for the fiscal year 23 county budget. Average daily membership is the total number of days within a given term, usually a school month or a school year, that a student's name is on the current roll of a class, regardless of them being present or absent, is the number of days in membership. The average daily membership for each school month is based on the sum of the number of those days in membership for all non-violating students, and non-violating students are students who have 10 consecutive absences or students who do not attend a school for 50% of their day. Students that have, repeating that there, sorry. So ADM is the basis for school funding and therefore a very significant component of the budget discussion. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction projects average daily membership annually for every North Carolina school district. The calculations are derived from growth projections, live birth certificates, and actual school attendances. At this time, we have not received any of those projections for the upcoming fiscal year. So for purposes of this discussion and planning, we have projected ADM based on actual attendance for this school year. Based on projections and actual students who are in charter schools at this time, the district is projecting a decrease in student enrollment of 161 students in comparison to the previous school year. Based on those current projections, the district can anticipate receiving local funding of $34.7 million, which is based upon the approved per pupil funding for this academic year, which is $4,367. Legislators passed a biennium budget in November that included an average 2.5% pay increase for certified or licensed staff, as well as classified or unlicensed staff. As a result, the district is anticipating an increased need of $1.1 million or $138 per pupil to support this legislation for the locally funded positions in the district. Earlier this year, the district contracted with Heard Eisenhower and Lopes to perform the classified compensation study that we just talked about in the timeline. This study looked at district positions in comparison to the market, and our market included Orange County government as well as 5 other school districts. As a result of the study, a recommended 30-step decompressed scale for each classified position in Orange County schools was recommended, and also providing a 1.5-step increase for every year of completed year of service. Recognizing that many in this population, again, have not seen pay increases in over 8 years, the superintendent is recommending that the complete compensation study be included in the fiscal year 23 budget request to commissioners. Recently, the commissioners identified and committed additional recurring revenues to both school districts. As a result, Orange County Schools is anticipating receiving an additional $631,000. A plan was presented to this board as well as the commissioners to use these additional funds to address the classified compensation study. The projected cost to implement the recommended study, net the additional funding committed by commissioners, would require an additional $2.5 million or $310 per pupil. And you will see that that is included here as an expansion request. In support of our certified or licensed staff, the superintendent is recommending that the local supplement be updated and calculated based on years of service, of state years of service, instead of years of service in Orange County schools, which is how it is currently calculated. This revision would require an additional $650,000 to implement. These 2 expansion recommendations would require additional local funds of approximately $3.1 million or $392 per pupil. Altogether, including the need to address the anticipated legislated salary increases and benefit increases and the superintendent's recommended expansion request, it brings the local budget request to $38.9 million or $4,897 per pupil, which is a $530 increase over the current funding. This recommended budget is an 8.8% increase over fiscal year '22. I will close out this evening with just a recap on our fund balance. So for district audit purposes, fund balance is measured on June the 30th of every fiscal year. State surplus school funds revert to the state at the close of the fiscal year, which we do not let state funds revert. We always ensure that they are utilized. And any local county surplus funds remain in the school district's fund balance under the control of the school board. At the beginning of this fiscal year, the district had a fund balance of $6.6 million, of which at the time the budget resolution was signed, 2.7 of it was assigned. So we had an unassigned fund balance of roughly $3.8 million. Since then, an additional $200,000 was appropriated for expenditures associated with renaming of 2 of our schools. And then the board approved a one-time bonus of $1,200 to all staff that required an additional $1.3 million of fund balance to be appropriated. As a result of those 2 additional fund balance appropriations, that brings our revised unassigned fund balance to $2.4 million. I do want to point out in fiscal year for this fiscal year, we appropriated $800,000 of fund balance to support the anticipated legislative increases that were going to occur for this fiscal year. The county was unable to provide us funding in our per pupil request for last fiscal year to support those anticipated increases. Therefore, we had to appropriate fund balance to ensure that we had a balanced budget. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Rapp.
Ms. Rath. So before we hear any comments from board members, so this is our budget hearing, and I believe we didn't have any members of the public sign up to speak to the budget. Is that correct? Is that correct, Ms. Stowe? Okay. And so now I think it's time for questions and comments from board members. And as we did at our last meeting, if we can try to start with just one question each before we circle around and hear multiple questions from board members. So who would like to start us off? Go ahead, Will.
So I'll start off with the same comment I had last time. I am concerned that we are not asking for master's pay as part of this, especially after we had teachers come and talk to us. We are asking for $3.1 million for 255 employees, but for the teachers, which is 541, we're asking for 651K. We know that the master's pay is about 1.2 million, and I think it would be appropriate to ask for, given that is explicitly what they have asked us to do.
Okay. Sarah?
I have a question. Clarifying the 800,000 we assigned in fund balance for anticipated salaries and benefits this past year. So can you just help me understand how that fits together with sort of our request for next year? And the request for next year, that was sort of an anticipated, and then we did get that increase. And like, we're not going to maintain any, we're not going to need to continue to use fund balance to cover those required salaries and benefits if the county were to approve the budget we've requested. right? I was just trying to understand that 800,000.
Right.
And sort of how that played out, and then
Sure.
means for next year.
So the $800,000 was part of our continuation budget request last year. So as a result of our funding being held constant or held at the same level as the previous year, we did not receive the funding to fund the continuation budget. So if the commissioners are unable to provide us the $138 per pupil needed, then yes, we will have to look to fund balance because it is legislated and we are required to provide those increases to staff.
And so just one follow-up clarification. So the 138 per pupil or the 1.1 million, that's sort of the cumulative of these 2 years of increases that the state is mandating that now we have to put into place, right? Like whatever it was this year and then.
So the 1.1 million is looking at what current salaries are right now, which would include the 2.5%, and then what we will need to increase the 2.5% again, as well as the retirement increases, as well as the hospitalization increases. So I hope
sort
that
of.
answered your question.
I think so. Like, I think it would have been half as big last year, and then we would have had to ask for another half of it this year. And so now we have to ask for all of it in this year, essentially.
Essentially.
Rhonda, can I try that a little differently? Last year we asked for the money, but we didn't get, the budget never went through last year, so it didn't really matter. But as I understand what you've told us, is that the state increase has already gone into effect. So you started paying the increase in
January.
So is that what the $800,000 is
The
funding?
$800,000 would have what we were anticipating when we submitted the budget last year was what we would have needed to implement the anticipated increases that did not, they came to fruition actually in November, and we were required to retro pay back to July and actually implement those salaries effective January 1.
Okay, and so the 800,000 you put aside is paying for that. Now, the
Yes.
$1 million the $1.1 million that you're asking for, that is for next year's 2.5% increase. And then next year we'll be asking for another 1.1 million to cut, because it's 2 years of 2.5%.
The biennium budget covered this fiscal year, which was July 1 of 2021 through June 30th of 22. And then the next year starts July 1 of 22 through June 30 of 23, and that encompasses the biennium budget.
So will we be asking the county for another $1 million next year because it's a second increase? It's
That's what this is.
That's what
this is for both covers both years?
The 1.1 is what is anticipated to implement a 2.5% pay increase on all of the staff in Orange County schools that are currently locally paid.
Right, and I don't mean to, well, I do mean to belabor this, but doesn't the biennium budget give them another 2.5% next year?
That's, next year is the budget request that we're asking for right now.
I understand.
Yes.
I just, to your
We've already
point.
We've already implemented the first 2.5% this year, and so next year is year 2. So what we need to ask for, because they didn't pay us the 2.5% for last year that we're paying out of fund balance, we need to ask for that increase and this increase this year.
So the continuation budget is based upon what our staff, what we currently have in our district right now, and what they are currently being paid right now. To increase them to the 2.5% that's in the biennium budget is what we are asking for here.
Okay.
I'm sorry if it's unclear. I'm not
It's-
intentionally being
It's
unclear.
a recurring expense.
It is a
It goes
recurring
2.5%
expenditure.
on, the whole payroll goes up 2.5%, and then next year the payroll is going to go up another 2.5%.
No. It did this year and next year. Those are the 2 years.
It goes up, it stays up, and then
Just stays there.
and then it goes up 2.5%.
No.
What am I missing?
It's already happened.
Yeah, so
First
we're
year already
incurring,
happened,
so
and
our,
then there's the second one that we're requesting right now. I'm not sure how to explain, I don't know.
our payroll is going up 2.5%
Yes.
forever, right? It
But
goes
it's
up.
not gonna go up again 2.5%, like it's going up one time 2.5%.
They
Oh,
gave the staff raises of 2.5% split, 2.5 each year over 2 years. And we are in year 1 right now, and so this is about year 2.
I thought they were getting 5%, 2.5% in year one, and another 2.5% in year two. Did I not get that right?
That's
Yes.
the same,
Yes.
I believe, I understand, that's the same thing. It was an average of 5% increase, which 2.5% is this year, and 2.5% is next year.
2.5% already went into effect. Their current salaries include that,
In January.
November, I think.
They are, the current salaries right now already have 2.5%.
Right.
We got to give them another 2.5% unless legislators come back and change that.
Okay, I'm going to take it offline because I'm not following this. I have a different
Wait,
question.
let's see if there's
Oh, I'm
another
sorry,
board
I
member
was
with a,
just, all right, sure.
let's see if there are other board members have a question
Sure.
first. Anybody? No, okay. Go ahead, Connie.
Last year, when we did the budget, we proposed adding a series of positions, and we put them forth in the budget. And this year, through the year, we've added positions that we funded with lapsed salaries, but they weren't budgeted positions. Some were new positions, some were increases in positions. So where is that covered?
So those positions that were approved are now part of the continuation budget if they were funded locally.
Okay,
So they are included in the $1.1 million that will be needed to increase those salaries for next fiscal year.
so the 1.1 million is, because we talked about it being the raises, I'm talking about the new positions. Are those salaries in the 1.1 also?
If they are locally funded, yes, they are.
Go ahead, Will.
So one other question I have really isn't to put in the budget here, but I would like us to ask the county commissioners to fund paying for the Whitted building since we're meeting here versus us paying for it out of the money they're giving us and have them manage the contracts. And I'm sure Chapel Hill will probably want a similar kind of thing where they're managing the contracts. We're not worried about technology and all those things. So I'd really like us to have that at the bottom, that we would prefer you to manage this and pay for it, and us to show up and leverage the venue for the community.
I can support that.
Thank you.
And if I may,
Go ahead, Dr. Lee, yes.
if there are no other comments or questions at this time, just wanted to go back to the master's pay. And as someone with a master's degree, I value that level of education, and I believe that our teachers should be all certified staff with that degree should be compensated for it. I just want to explain why I'm not recommending it in the budget. Simply because it's a matter of priorities, and I'm concerned about our ability to sustain it. And looking at our classified staff, based on the salary study, and that we know that they've not had a raise in 8 years. So when, prioritizing, I would have to give priority to our classified staff. But at the same time, I certainly understand and would hope that our legislators, I understand it's something that comes up periodically, and that they would move forward with that, because our teachers overall in North Carolina are woefully underpaid compared to other states. It is a shame and a disgrace, and I'll go on record to say that. And And I hope, though, that they will include master's pay in their future deliberations. But that was the only reason I didn't include it. Just again, prioritizing and wanting to ensure that our classified staff, who have gone so long without a pay raise, that this is their time.
So I would like to respond. So in our budget committee meeting, we talked about asking for everything we wanted because the county does not come back and say, I'm going to fund this item or this item. They say, this is your budget, and then the board decides how to distribute that. I think it's a clear message to the county what the great need is, and showing that need in there as well. Not to say that we would go fund that first or the other, because we will get that opportunity once we find out what our funding is. So that's why I'm pushing it, as we said in that meeting, we should always ask for what we need. And to me, that would be one of those items. I would love for the state to do it, but we know that at this point, it's not reality. So that is why I'm pushing hard for that, because I think we should ask for it and then do the prioritization, because I agree. I would absolutely prioritize that as well. But I prefer to ask for what we believe the full need is.
Okay. Other board members to that point, Sarah?
Well, I appreciate that advocacy for the master's pay. And I understand the rationale for not making that ask right now. And while I think we need to sort of ask for generally what we need, I think if it were the real list of what we needed, it would actually be a lot longer than this. I think we should increase our supplement for teachers. There's a lot that we would put on a list. And to me, I think the idea of showing that we're doing some level of prioritization and choice among those things makes sense. And so while I generally am supportive of asking for larger amounts maybe than the board has at other times, I think it makes sense to me that we're sort of prioritizing and putting this. I do think in future years, we should really be looking at the total supplement when we look at what some of the other districts are paying around us and whether we're being really competitive there.
Anyone we haven't heard from yet?
I will say that, I of course attended the budget meeting, the budget committee, and I appreciate everything that you did for us because it enhanced our understanding, came in here with a different mind frame. So thank you, Rhonda. That's why I didn't have any questions, because you did a thorough job during the budget hearing. Thank you. Budget meeting.
Yep.
And Carrie, can I just offer a suggestion for future budget development years? I think, I noticed we didn't have any feedback at the public hearing about this, and it just makes me wonder if we should be having that aspect of this process earlier on in the process, in the sort of idea generation stage, so that we can hear from the community about what they think we should be prioritizing in our budget requests. So that might be a thing to think about, is just in sort of, rather than putting the hearing as sort of a reaction to a proposal, it's sort of like earlier idea generation kind of hearing. Thought for next year.
Okay, so where are we? Let's see.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Fund balance, there is a recommended fund balance that we're supposed to have. This, I know it's like a 2%, 3% of the budget.
5.5% of your local budget is what is recommended.
And how much is that for us?
Be around $2 million.
Okay, so we're good there. Thank you.
Okay. So our task says to discuss the superintendent's recommended budget, suggest modifications, as we've had some discussion about, for incorporation to the final budget document slated for approval on April 11th. And we do have a budget committee meeting on April 8th. So how do we need to leave things tonight?
I don't think any action is requested.
No. Okay, we'll just leave it. Any further comments or question before we? Hillary?
I'm supportive of the recommendation.
Okay.
I didn't make that clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for your work, Rhonda. All right, Dr. Felder.
All right, so thank you, Mrs. Rath. All right, so where are we? Okay, next slide, please. Thank you so much, Mr. Miller. And so the budget reflects our priorities, and our priorities are focused on the 4 goals of our new strategic plan. And so while we are preparing for an official launch, we have most certainly been implementing the plan. And so next slide, please. And so in alignment with, there we go, okay. So with an alignment with the timeline previously shared in another meeting during the first half of the year, we completed the items outlined for the beginning of the year. Next click. As we enter the middle of the year, at the last February board meeting, we presented an update on the 4 key strategies of Goal 1. Next slide. And as we near the end of the year, the team will prepare updates on the other 3 goals. But tonight, we will complete the data update for Goal 1. Next slide, please. So members of our district curriculum and instruction team, as well as Dr. Doyle and Ms. Cobbs with Schools and Achievement will present to you the middle of year assessment data, as well as SEL and Panorama data, using data across multiple indicators. Our team has engaged in purposeful data analysis as we continue to execute our learning recovery and acceleration plan. Before we dive deeper into the data, it's important to always reset and remember that our district's strategic plan serves as our North Star. So as you can see in this visual, we believe that when everything we do is rooted in equity to ensure all students, going too fast, Mr. Miller. You put the whole visual up, okay, that's all right,
Hurry up,
it's
get this
okay.
done.
He told me I could control the clicker myself. I know that's what he's thinking. You could have had it yourself, Dr. Felder, but that's okay, Brian. I still love you. And so when everything we do is rooted in equity to ensure all students receive what they need to succeed, when we do so by focusing on these 4 goals, our strategic plan goals. Goal 1, teaching tomorrow's leaders. Goal 2, excellence and efficiency. Goal 3, empowering culture. And goal 4, family and community engagement. And when we start with strong core instruction that includes culturally relevant and responsive teaching, a research-based curriculum that allows for authentic engagement between the student and between students and teachers, and when through data analysis, teachers are able to personalize and differentiate supports for their students who may need more enrichment and remediation, through tiered instruction and intervention. And when teaching and learning is mindful of the social-emotional learning of our students and staff, the social-emotional well-being of our students and staff in order to develop the whole person, then and only then will we recover our learning and accelerate growth for every child. And so at this time, I am going to invite Dr. Gammon, there he is, and Dr. Gammon is going to lead us in the review of Goal 1 and begin the review of academic achievement data as it relates to Goal 1. So Dr. Gammon.
Got it. All right, thank you, Dr. Felder. Good evening, Chair Doyle, Vice Chair Stevens, board members and community. Members of our curriculum and instruction team, as you can see with me this evening, will be providing a summary of our data analysis for several of our assessments that were administered thus far this school year. In order for all of our learners to excel by having access to and benefiting from rigorous core curriculum and instruction, as Dr. Felder just noted, and it's as stated in Goal 1, it's imperative for us to understand how our students are doing. There are other data sets that we are analyzing, and we will provide those updates as we complete our analysis. It's important, again, to note that while the assessment data is extremely important, it is only one source of data, and it does not define our learners' overall profile. So this evening, our team will share middle of the year assessment data across multiple assessments. We'd like to ask the board to please, if at all possible, hold all questions until the end of our presentation after all the data has been presented. Our team will highlight what the data is telling us, what the data is not telling us, celebrations in the data, as well as opportunities for improvement and how we are planning to address those opportunities. The first set of data we will focus on this evening is our DIBELS 8, which is the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, and consists of a set of measures assessing foundational reading skills in grades kindergarten through 3rd. Second, we will examine Ames Web Plus data. Ames Web Plus is a universal screener administered to students in literacy grades 4 through 8 and math grades kindergarten through 8. And it's used to identify gaps in foundational skills as well as levels of risk. Finally, members of the curriculum instruction team will share key takeaways from the fall 2021 end of course exam data as compared to 2019 and 2020 end of course exam data in the areas of English 2, Math 1, Math 3, and Biology. At this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Amber Wilson, our Executive Director of Literacy, to share an update on DIBELS.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity for our team to be here with you this evening. All right. So in front of you, you have the DIBELS beginning of year to middle of year composite scores. So the DIBELS 8th edition is the reading assessment that we're using this year. If you remember at the beginning of the year, we talked about that this was a change from DIBELS Next. And it is utilized in kindergarten, first, second, and 3rd grade. Each student receives a composite score, which is calculated based on the performance of reading measures in all of the different measures of phoneme segmentation, letter naming fluency, oral reading fluency, and comprehension. The composite score is a very reliable and accurate predictor of overall risk in reading. So if you look at the data here, this data shows that each grade level has experienced growth between beginning of the year and middle of the year assessments. In kindergarten specifically, there's been an increase in the number of students who are showing grade level proficiency. So there have been 134 additional students demonstrating proficiency, and we've only gained 5 students. So that's a lot of positive movement there in kindergarten. With 1st grade, we've showed an increase of 17 students who are showing grade level proficiency. And again, I think our increase was 2. I can't read the numbers from here. 2nd grade also showed an increase in the number of students who were demonstrating grade level proficiency, and 3rd grade showed an increase in the number of students who were demonstrating grade level proficiency by 13 students. But I do want to point out for that data that we do have 8 new students represented in there. So that is the grade level where we've had the most fluctuation in enrollment. We are excited about some of the trends that we're seeing in our DIBELS 8th edition data, especially as reflected in our kindergarten and 1st grade cohorts. We do believe that these trends of growth in our early grades reflect the strategic decisions that we have prioritized here in Orange County Schools this school year, and have really doubled down on foundational reading skills with the adoption of Hegarty curriculum and the introduction of decodable readers. Across our 7 elementary schools, literacy coaches, interventionists, MTSS leads, administrators, and teachers have already been hard at work analyzing this data, modifying core instruction, and tiered intervention groups to be responsive to the needs of our students. The next slide that I want to show you is our correlation data. So I want to take a minute and just explain how to interpret this slide because it can be a lot. So let's look up at kindergarten. So if you notice, there's a number 1 up beside of where it says grade K, and there's numbers across the top. So you will see that there were 233 students in kindergarten that were red on the beginning of year assessment. There were 71 students that were yellow on the beginning of year assessment, 78 students who were green, and 67 students who were blue. The next line where you have the colored bars is the movement of those students. So let's go back to our students who were red at the beginning of the year. Of those 233 students, 99 of them remain in the red. 49 of them have moved to yellow. 51 of those red students are now green, and 34 of those students are now blue. Of our 71 students in yellow at beginning of the year in kindergarten, we now have 5 students who have moved to red, 15 who have maintained yellow, 20 that are now green, and 31 who are now blue. I'm not going to go through all of the grade levels for each measure, but I did want to ensure that you knew how to interpret this data. So our coaching priorities, as we have done literacy walks in all of our schools, continue to monitor the instructional practices so that we can understand what schools are doing every day that are leading to the growth of students or that are not leading to the growth of some students. Here you have our middle of the year M-Class data by subgroup. So I'm just going to highlight a few takeaways here for you. If you look at our district male to female data, it is aligned across DIBELS 8. So there's not a variation in any of the grade levels K through 3 between the performance of our male students and our female students. Our Hispanic subgroup growth for kindergarten was 31%, which is comparable to the growth that we saw of our white students in kindergarten. Our Black students in kindergarten only grew by 19%, which is not comparable to our white and Hispanic subgroup. Therefore, that must be a focus and a priority as we're looking at instruction. White students' proficiency far outgrew our Black and Hispanic subgroups in all grade levels. And our Hispanic subgroup in 3rd grade is exceeding the growth of our Black and our white subgroups. So that is a celebration in this data for those students. We are committed to addressing the barriers that prevent all students in OCS from achieving high rates of proficiency, and this is a priority in the work that we're doing at each and every school. On the next slide, we're going to explore some of the action steps that we are taking to address achievement and opportunity gaps that are represented in this disproportionate data. So here you can see that Hegarty has been a great addition to our core instruction to systematically teach phonemic awareness, as this was a gap that we had identified here in OCS. In kindergarten, we are looking at our phoneme segmentation fluency to see that that instruction is working. That's one of the independent measures that goes into that composite score. So when we're looking at this data for action items, we have to dig in a little bit deeper than the composite level to see exactly which measures are doing what. In 1st grade, we look a lot at the nonsense word fluency assessment with the letter and letter segmentation fluency to see if students are proficient in their letter sounds in isolation, as well as when reading whole words. Many of our students are not decoding whole words during the nonsense word fluency assessment, and this leads us to lean more into our work with decodable readers. And thank you again for the texts that were recently acquired. In 3rd grade, we are looking at vocabulary and our oral reading fluency scores, and we've started the phonics to reading program in our 3rd grade classes this year. And we see that based on our nonsense word fluency and looking at our decoding skills, that from phonics to reading is making a positive impact. In 3rd grade, our district grew overall 8 points with nonsense word fluency with letters sounds, and 10 points with nonsense word fluency with general decoding. So here you can see some of our focus in terms of opportunities for improvement. So we do want to continue to prioritize increasing our students' ability to decode when they're in text, not just in isolation. We want to ensure that our students are increasing their oral reading fluency skills, as well as our teachers' capacity to differentiate instruction for our EL and EC students, recognizing that those learners need different supports in the classroom, and what we provide for those students is beneficial for all students. Increasing our vocabulary and our background knowledge and how we explicitly bring those pieces into our instruction. So we will continue to address these opportunities through professional development and implementation of small group decodable text instruction in all K-1 classrooms. So we are continuing to work on that with individual PLCs as well as at the school level with administration. We are shifting our priorities to staff to provide support from phonics to reading implementation with our third grade students, but also in some fourth grade classes at some schools based on their data and their students' needs. We have EL coaching opportunities and making sure that those teachers also get to go and do some peer observations, because we can see in our data there are pockets where there is great celebration and things that are working well for that population of students, and we want to be able to replicate that and share the knowledge that we have here in this district from our talented teachers. We are also providing professional development to teachers and PLCs on how to differentiate core, again, focusing on that lens for our EC students, our EL learners, but also our students of color, to ensure that we are engaging them in core instruction and not relying on intervention to get us out of this. We are also in the process of selecting core curriculum resources that build students' background knowledge through complex text across multiple contents. And all of this work continues to be a focus as we walk buildings, we talk to teachers, we talk to administrators, and we're constantly looking at data and engaging with them around what is working, what is not working, and what supports are needed. So I'm now going to turn it over to our MTSS director, Mrs. Emily Myers, who's going to lead us through analysis with our Ames Web Plus data. Thank you all.
Good evening. Orange County School students in grades 4 through 8 completed the Ames Web Plus Universal Screening Benchmark at the beginning of the 21-22 school year and again at the midpoint of the year. And this is reading data. So as Ms. Wilson shared a moment ago, our K-3 students take the Dibbles assessment, and our 4-8 students are screened using Ames Web Plus. This chart shows the percentage of students at each of the 3 risk levels, high, medium, and low, by grade level at these 2 reading benchmark windows. Also noted is the percentage of change, either positive, negative, or no change, for each risk level by grade. For example, in the fall, 14% of tested 5th grade students were shown to be at high risk according to Ames Web Plus. And in the winter, 13% of tested 5th grade students were at high risk, for a 1% positive change. You can see that overall, there are 9 areas of comparison that show a decline, meaning that more students were at risk at the midpoint of the year than were at risk at the beginning of the year. There are 2 comparison areas with no change, and in 4 areas, students are now at lower risk than they were in the fall of 2021. This graphic shows the middle of year reading data from Ames Web Plus broken down by race. It is important to note that demographic information found in Ames Web Plus is pulled from PowerSchool through our Clever integration. As a result, data disaggregated by race is reliant upon accurate student information in PowerSchool. Student performance in the 90th to 99th percentile is considered to be well above average. Performance in the 75th to 89th percentile is considered above average. Performance in the 26th to 74th percentile is average. Performance in the 11th to 25th percentile is considered below average. and performance in the 1st to 10th percentile is considered to be well below average. As you can see, Ames Web Plus reading performance in grades 4 through 8 is not consistent across our subgroups as shown in this graphic. Overall, this foundational skill screening data shows a slightly negative trend in grades 4, 6, 7, and 8. But it is important to note that in all grades, the majority of students fall in the low risk category. And in grades 7 and 8, the percentage of students considered low risk is around 80%. Screener data can be used to determine the health of the instructional core. And this data shows that on average, in grades 4 through 8, approximately 74% of students are considered low risk, meaning that these students have the foundational skills necessary to be successful readers. Other celebrations to note, our 5th grade students are moving in the right direction across all risk areas. So at the midpoint of the year, we saw that there were fewer 5th graders that were at high risk, fewer 5th graders at moderate risk, and more 5th graders who had moved into that low risk category. As we review the Ames Web Plus data from both the beginning of year and middle of year, it is noted that many students did not complete an oral reading fluency assessment as part of the overall reading battery. The oral reading fluency assessment is considered optional by Ames Web, as it is not needed to compute a composite score. However, we know the instructional power that comes when teachers hear their students read, as well as the high level of correlation between oral reading fluency and comprehension. For this reason, a primary area of focus in reading for grades 4 through 8 is to ensure all teachers are trained to give this assessment and are trained in how to use the data from the assessment to provide needed fluency instruction. This is often not a focus of core reading instruction after 3rd grade, but is an area of need for many struggling readers beyond grade 3. Here we see the Ames Web Plus Math, beginning of year to middle of year, or MOI, risk transition data in the same comparison format as the reading data was previously presented. We can look at our kindergarten data as an example of the overall trends seen from BOI to MOI in the area of math. In the fall, 30% of tested kindergarten students were at high risk according to Ames Web Plus. And in the winter, 19% of tested kindergarten students were at high risk, resulting in 11% positive change. These results are similar to results seen in almost all grade levels, K through 8 in math. Our next slide shows the middle of year math data from Ames Web Plus by race. Much like we saw with reading, Ames Web Plus math performance in grades K through 8 is also not consistent across our subgroups. Our math data shows that students are moving in the right direction, out of high and moderate risk and into low risk categories. This data suggests that students are growing in foundational math knowledge and skills that focus on place value, the magnitude of numbers, fluency, and computation. Much of the Ames Web Plus math assessment is comprised of fluency measures. Math fluency is important as it contributes to students' abilities to solve more difficult problems more quickly and more accurately. As we reviewed the data from both the beginning of the year and the middle of the year, it's noted that although there is quite a bit to celebrate, and we are really excited, there is a lot of positive growth. Approximately 63% of all students in grades K-8 are considered low risk in the area of math. However, only 5th grade has a low risk percentage that was over 70%. Upon review of data at each grade level, A primary area of focus is to determine additional supports needed specifically in grade 6. Our current sixth graders showed negative trends in that more students were found to be at high risk in the middle of the year than were in risk in the beginning of the year. And there are fewer students considered low risk at the middle of the year than there were at the beginning of the year. Data review with the math facilitator and sixth grade math teachers will be completed, including an item analysis from the concepts and applications portion of the assessment to help determine performance areas that will require additional instruction in the form of a core plan to address our student needs. At this time, I'd like to introduce Connie Crimmins, Executive Director of Exceptional Children and Pre-K Services, to share additional AIMSweb Plus data for our students with disabilities.
Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to show this chart. This chart shows the percentage of students with disabilities by school that demonstrated growth in the area of reading and math as measured by AIMSweb. There are several important items to take into consideration when examining this chart and thinking about the overall data as it relates to students with disabilities. There is an acknowledgement that students with disabilities subgroup is consistently the lowest achieving band of students in Orange County schools, along with multi-language learners. In August of 2019, multiple direct instruction programs were put in place to intentionally target the low performance of students with disabilities. And direct instruction programs are defined as they're carefully designed, small increments with clearly defined targets, systematic and explicit, and I like to call it eyeball to eyeball instruction. That August 2019 date is important because most of our direct instruction programs are, again, face-to-face, small group, and we know what happened in March of 2020. Growth is an important measure when determining the effectiveness of instruction for students with disabilities and determining if the instructional practices and materials are creating accelerated growth for students. And finally, from year to year, the students with disabilities subgroup is not the same, and let me explain that a little bit. I looked at one school, and a third of the students in the subgroup of students with disabilities was new. So they were just newly identified, had not had the benefit of the instruction. A third of the group did have that instruction over multiple years, and then a third of that group had exited. So when you looked at it the next year, the students had changed. So when we're talking about proficiency, we do need to keep in mind that some of the factors that do apply for students with disabilities. So as we looked into this data deeper, you can see that from the first column, it does have limited information, as the data in the majority of our databases does not nimbly break down the data for students with disabilities. And so when we look about what the data does not tell us, it doesn't have the norm reference data, the student performance relative to national or district raw, it provided raw scores only. The risk factor. So when you looked at AIMSweb and MClass with the colors and charts, when we were looking at the AIMSweb data, we weren't able to look at were they moving from a low risk factor to a high risk factor. We have now figured out a way to do that, so we will be able to break down that data and present that to our schools to be able to assess things a little bit more granularly. And then if you look at the last chart, there are some, or if you looked at the chart, and I'm going to go back for just a minute, there were some celebrations. If you look at reading, I'm going to highlight Eflin, Cheeks, and Hillsborough. They are the schools where we know that there is consistent and implementation with fidelity of our direct instruction programs. They are using it as stated in the program guides, and also 5 days a week, which is important. So those two schools are showing the highest growth in the area of reading. The middle school math data is also indicating that the use of the direct instruction program is producing the desired results. Gravelly Hill Middle School was an early adopter of one of our programs, and it is starting to show the highest growth in math overall for students with disabilities as measured by the Ames Web Screener. And then if you look at the first column, what is the focus of the opportunity for improvement? The questions posed on this slide are not unique to Orange County schools. However, we know that without addressing these specific questions, the performance of students with disabilities will continue to lag behind other subgroups. The work of the EC department is moving back to the items listed above. So lessening the compliance process through the intentional work of the educational diagnosticians, allowing our teachers to focus on teaching. Building, implementing, and evaluating an articulated cycle of data review, including data from fidelity checks, walkthrough data, and performance data inclusive of the direct instruction and programs, progress monitoring data, and performance data. And then finally, the tight alignment of IEP goals and objectives to the needs of students. There is one acronym in there I do want to define for you. So one of the things when we talk about least restrictive environment, we do want to answer the question, how is that least restrictive environment, or the amount of time a student spends in their general education classroom supported by a special education teacher addressing SDI, which means specific, wow, and I should know that. It's specially designed instruction, all the acronyms, and it goes out of my head. But, and what that means is adapting as appropriate to the need of an eligible child, the content, the methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of that child that results from the disability, as well to ensure the access of the child to the general education curriculum. So really, if we can answer that question, which is the question that all of us directors in the state try to work on, we will make progress for our students with disabilities. So thank you for your time, and I'm now going to pass this to Ms. Mariah Morris, the Director of Literacy.
Good evening. The data on the next slide refers to updates in our English 2 end of course fall administration periods for the 2019, 2020, and 2021 school years. Just as a reminder, fall of 2019 was the last time that our students were in school pre-COVID. In fall of 2020, we were in the midst of our remote instruction with COVID, and then the fall 2021 data is for this school year, as the majority of our students are returning to our schools for in-person instruction. Overall, the Orange County Schools participation rate for the English 2 EOC fall administrations is getting closer to our pre-COVID rates. We had 97% of eligible students take their fall 2019 English 2 exam, which is closer to the 99% rate that we experienced in fall 2019. We did experience a dip in 2020 with 89.9% of our eligible students testing. So that is good news as we're getting our students back in the buildings face to face and able to take these exams in person. The overall Orange County Schools proficiency rate for students who scored a level 3, 4, or 5, which is what we call grade level proficient for the acronym GLP, increased from 46.4% in fall 2019 to 55.3% in fall 2021. This is an increase of 8.7 percentage points across these 3 testing windows. And that is definitely something to celebrate as we are emerging from COVID stronger with this English 2 score. We're also noticing a positive increase trend at Orange High School that we would like to highlight, where the percentage of OHS, Orange High School students who tested and scored a level 3, 4, or 5 increased from 37.4% in fall of 2019 to 58.7% in fall 2020 across our district. This has moved their grade level proficiency rate to slightly above the district average, so we're very proud of them. While we do have these positive trends to report, it is important to note that this data does not tell us the overall yearly proficiency averages, including our spring data. It is possible that this data may be skewed if there were higher percentages of honors to regular level courses administered in either semester. So this data does not give us a breakdown of how many honors sections were in fall as compared to the spring. However, we did think that it was most beneficial to compare our fall data sets because we do have fall 2019 to fall 2020 to fall 2021. We will discuss the disaggregated data more on the next slide, but before moving on, we would just like to celebrate with you that OCS has shown an improvement in proficiency rates across the district in our English 2 EOC scores. Where am I pointing here, guys? There we go. The data on this slide narrows the focus of our analysis to this year's fall 2021 administration. So instead of looking at the data across the 3 years, we're really zeroing in on this year's administration. And we're able to disaggregate our data to compare our proficiency across our different underrepresented groups. This is an important step in our commitment to ensuring equitable access to literacy achievement across the district. The literacy team is committed to ensuring an engaging and equitable literacy program at each school. And understanding this data will help inform our next steps as we move forward with targeted support. Data from our fall 2021 administration of the English 2 EOC shows that there are disproportionate proficiency rates based on our underrepresented student groups. In this data, we see that students belonging to the Black and Hispanic subgroups are disproportionately not meeting proficiency at the same rates as students from the multiracial or white subgroup. We are committed to addressing the barriers that prevent all of our students in Orange County schools from achieving high rates of proficiency. And this is a priority in the work that we do. We know the strength of our literacy team is only as strong as all of our students being able to achieve literacy proficiency. On the next slide, we'll explore the opportunity for action steps that we plan to take to address this achievement and opportunity gap represented on these slides.
You did it. You did it.
In order to move forward in a strategic and aligned manner, we believe it is essential to build the capacity of strong PLCs at each high school. Strong functioning PLCs are grade level teams that have the ability to analyze data, engage in authentic conversations about standards aligned instruction, and develop instruction that is engaging and equitable and rigorous. Strong PLCs establish the structure and the processes that are needed for grade level teams to engage in ongoing collaborative inquiry in order to help all students achieve better results in mastery. They also provide the protocol for students and teachers taking ownership of the data to analyze the progress that they are making and reflect throughout the learning process so that teachers always have the opportunity to pause and be reflective practitioners for our students who are struggling and not yet proficient. Additionally, the district literacy and C&I teams are committed to identifying and disrupting barriers that prevent all of our student groups, including our underrepresented groups, achieve success. This work will occur by working closely with school-level teams within the MTSS infrastructure to track student data, problem solve, and examine the rigor and engagement of all of our secondary courses, including the rigor of our standards level courses alongside that of our honors level courses. It is also a priority of the literacy team to collaborate with our school equity teams as well as Dr. Keeling to move forward with culturally responsive pedagogy that meets the needs of all of our students. At this point, I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Chris Gammon, who will walk us through our math EOC scores.
All right, thank you, Ms. Morrison. Thank you all again for the time this evening. My couple of slides here are actually not in the same order as Ms. Morrison's, and I actually like the order that she did much better, so great job. But I want to start with, we're going to look at our Math 1 and our Math 3 subgroup data first, and then we'll get into the data and overall data analysis and our actions for improvement. As you can see on this slide, we're looking at our Math 1 subgroup data. This really narrows our focus into all of our underrepresented populations of students compared to their white peers for the fall 2021 Math 1 EOC administration. You can see, just like Ms. Morris noted, similar discrepancies across all of those subgroup areas. It's important to note as you're reading the graph that when you're looking at the blue bar represents students who scored a level 3, which means that first level of proficiency. Students who, if you see an orange bar, students that scored a level 4, and then if you see a gray bar, it will be students that have scored a level 5. Level 4 and 5 are both college and career ready levels. You will notice in that Math 1 data for the fall administration that there are not level 5 scores. Our next slide is subgroup data for Math 3. I want to give you an opportunity to look at that data as well. There are some positive trends in this data, which I will share in the overall analysis in just a minute. But again, just as Ms. Morris noted, there are a lot of areas that we see for improvement. We're very much aware of this, not only as a district leadership team, but also at the school level as well. And we're looking forward to working together to continue to support our math programs, pre-K all the way through 12th grade. Okay, so our overall data analysis for Math 1 and 3, the data used for this portion of the update does refer to Math 1 and 3, as I've noted, and that administration is from 2019, 2020, and 2021, as has been previously noted. Again, the fall 2019 administration we know was pre-COVID, fall 2020 was during the height of COVID and remote learning, and then fall of 2021, which just occurred, is emerging from COVID, and we're experiencing that in-person instruction again. When looking at our Math 1 data, overall, Orange County Schools' participation rate of Math 1 EOC administration was 93%. So we had 93% participation rate in the fall of 2021. This level of participation is moving closer to our pre-pandemic participation rate of 98%, after experiencing a dip to 75.8% during the fall of 2020. The overall Orange County Schools proficiency rate of students who, again, scored a level 3, 4, or 5, which is considered grade level proficient on the Math 1 EOC, decreased from 55.3% in the fall of 2019 pre-COVID to 14.3% during fall of 2020, which was at the height of the pandemic. During the fall of 2021 administration, the overall proficiency rate has now increased to 33.6%, which is something to celebrate compared to the fall of 2020 scores, but it has not yet reached those pre-pandemic levels. Overall, our participation rate with the Math 3 EOC exam administration was 97% this fall, 2021. This level of participation, again, is moving closer to our pre-pandemic participation rate, which was actually at 100% in 2019, and it had dipped to 90% during remote learning in the fall of 2020. The overall Orange County Schools proficiency rate of students who scored a level 3, 4, or 5 on the Math 3 EOC decreased from 68.4% in the fall of 2019 to 54.6% in fall of 2020. It's important to celebrate that this past fall 2021, the overall proficiency increased to 70.8%, which exceeds the pre-pandemic proficiency rate. While we do have these positive trends to report in some areas, it's important to note that this data, as mentioned at the outset, does not tell us several things. It does not tell us the overall yearly proficiency averages, including spring data for the spring EOC administration. The data fails to include students in Math 1 Foundations, which will be a year long, and students who took Math 1 in 8th grade. Data does not reflect enrollment differences between schools, including the percentage of enrollees taking Math 1 in grade 9. The data does not include the distribution of math classes between fall and spring semesters, as well when accelerated levels of classes are being taught. Additionally, factors such as vacancies in classroom teaching positions, which have compounded the nationwide evidence of a significant decline in math achievement through the pandemic, are also important to be mindful of. We will discuss opportunities for improvement in actions on the next slide. But before moving on, again, I want to make sure that we take time to celebrate our schools who are rebounding through the pandemic, and we're seeing those positive trends in proficiency data, especially in Math 3. So our next slide, when we're looking at opportunities for improvement and action steps, an initial step that we will take, and one thing that I think is really an amazing just work. I'm trying to think how I want to capture this. I think just the consistency of the work that's happening throughout this year, as I've watched Dr. Doyle, Dr. Felder, others have presented on our strategic plan and how we're systematically building that runway for a lot of systems and processes work that we want to build in Orange County schools. We are now at that place where we can really take steps in action within those systems. And so an initial step that we are taking to address this opportunity for improvement is to contract our teacher leaders from Orange County schools this summer to work specifically on curriculum mapping. And this is so critical at the high school level because, as you saw earlier, there are a lot of assessment pieces at the K-5 or K-8 level that do not necessarily exist in high school outside of our NC check-in. So we're going to have a team that's working to ensure that our pacing guides are aligned to standards and closely aligned to the NC check-ins so that we do have actionable formative assessment data as part of the MTSS data analysis process. At the high school level, as noted, we rely heavily on these formative assessments since we do not have other measures such as Ames Web, Dibbles, et cetera, beyond those early elementary or middle grades. Also, as mentioned previously, Orange County Schools will take a strategic and sustained approach to build the capacity of our PLCs, as well as work on building those strong MTSS processes. And teams at each high school will be working with Ms. Myers and others to build those runways to best support all of our learners. These three actions that I've noted are aligned with our strategic plan goals. We are also continuing, even at this present time, to pursue creative tutoring opportunities for students and building the capacity of our district and school-based math coaches, which were ESSER-funded positions that we are extremely grateful for. And we have seen some positive turns or trends, as you saw earlier in the Ames Web data for math. But those math coaches are receiving professional development and coaching. But we're also seeking out collaborative partnerships with local universities beyond that as well. So there are a lot of pieces that are coming together. Additionally, our school leadership teams are really working diligently with our human capital division to fill vacant positions by proactively working with our local colleges and universities, really to recruit talented educators. And so as we continue to build that capacity of our K-8 math coaches, as well as our district math coaches who are supporting the high schools, our district leadership team is continuing just to support so many different opportunities to be supportive of this work. So we're going to shift. One last area for me is biology, okay, and it's a similar trend, so I'm not going to belabor some of these pieces, but when we're looking at our biology end of course administration, again, we will see subgroup data where there are deficiencies there across the board. Overall, in Orange County schools, when we're talking about biology, and I'm going to flip to the next slide, our participation rate for the biology EOC exam was 96% in the fall of this past year. This level of participation increased from 75% in 2020 during the height of the pandemic, and it's also higher than our pre-pandemic participation rate of 88% in 2019. The overall proficiency rate of students who scored level 3, 4, or 5 in biology on the fall administration decreased from 72.8% in the fall of 2019 to 50.9% in the fall of 2020. During this past fall administration, the overall proficiency rate decreased slightly again to 48.3%. And so as we dug deeper into that data, of the 317 total students who took the exam in the fall, 153 students scored a level 3, 4, or 5, meaning they are proficient. Of those 153 students who are proficient, 135 of those students scored a level 4 or 5, denoting that they are college and or career ready. So when we get into a data analysis piece around the biology data, as we've stated repeatedly, that this data does not tell us, again, certain things. Our overall yearly proficiency averages, including spring data. It fails to include certain things like actual instructional days that occurred, hours that existed during the fall semester. There may have been, pandemic-related things. There could have been interruptions due to winter weather that impacted instructional time. So those are just factors that aren't going to just jump out in the data. Those are for further investigation. The data is not disaggregated based on students with disabilities, EL students, et cetera. You don't see that in this data. Additionally, fall 2021, and this is very important to note, is the first time our biology teachers administered the NC check-ins. And those assessments were not aligned with the existing pacing that we had in place because those check-ins came out late summer. Pacing was already established for this school year. So that's part of that process going into this summer with the curriculum mapping and the pacing. So we're focusing on that curriculum map, scope, and sequence. It's a top priority for us moving forward to ensure that those assessments are informative and useful to drive instructional decisions. We do not want to be in a space where we're administering assessments that aren't aligned with pacing because then it's not giving us a realistic look at what students are grasping from what they're being taught. And so our final slide, and I want to make sure I think I jumped a little bit ahead there. As noted again throughout the presentation, we're going to continue to leverage our teacher leaders in the area of biology as well to devise and revise our curriculum maps this summer. We are also going to continue to take those strategic and sustained approaches to building the capacity of our PLCs. And that's not just at an individual high school, that's across schools in the district to build that collaborative network. And also that MTSS process. I hope you're hearing a theme this evening that those areas of curriculum mapping, PLC work, and MTSS structures are really what we're going after. And so again, all of this work, as Ms. Morris noted, is closely aligned with our equity focus, which was that first foundational piece that Dr. Felder referenced at the outset this evening, as we are steadfast in our pursuit of culturally responsive pedagogy and social emotional learning being infused in all we do. So it's not just about developing curriculum maps, it's developing curriculum maps through that lens. And that's a different space that we're working in now compared to prior years. And so these actions, as I've stated before, are aligned with our strategic plan goals. And so at this time, we are open to any questions that you may have. Thank you all for your patience this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gammon, and Ms. Wilson, Ms. Crimmins, Ms. Morris, and Ms. Myers. I see Dr. Moore's hand. Before we get started, what I was going to suggest, and I know we have a lot of questions, there's so much good data in there, and I really appreciate your data analysis and how you had a consistent way that you approached what the data said and didn't say and all those things was really helpful. What I was going to suggest is that we go into sections so that you're not having to pop back up and forth. So if we could first take questions on the DIBELS and M-class data, and then we go into the Ames Web. And just for board members, I would say we have about 40 minutes because we also have SEL and Panorama data to discuss and Summer Academy. So that's about 5 or so minutes per person. So if we can keep track of ourselves. Dr. Moore, do you have a question on the first section? If we invite Ms. Wilson back up for that?
No, I just had a general comment.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all for your presentations. I'm very, very pleased to see the growth And I like how you reflected what is working and also how you reflected strategies for improvement. Thank you all for that.
Okay, so questions on like the K through 3, the Dibbles and M class? Who has questions from that section? Sarah?
I think it is mostly not a question, but a compliment. Yeah, and just to echo that, I mean, this is the result of so much hard work from this team and from teachers, and it is the data analysis is so thoughtful about, okay, now what do we do with this? So just really appreciating that. I was looking at some of the places where you saw progress, and the kindergartners, you sort of highlighted this, but the kids who came in at the beginning of the year below grade level, 45% of them were on grade level by the middle of the year. I mean, that's really incredible. And there's, the leaps aren't as big in the other grades, but I think it's like 20% of the first graders had moved up who were below grade level or now on grade level. I mean, that's like really remarkable stuff, So I just think that's fantastic.
Thank you. We're very appreciative of our teachers' commitment to really focusing strategically on foundational literacy skills and utilizing the tools that we've given them to really get in there with kids and do that work every day. So thank you for acknowledging their
Awesome.
work.
It's so much hard work, I know, and I'm just so grateful. The question I had is around, you mentioned that I don't know if it was Black kindergartners or sort of across the subgroups across all of the M class that Black students had seen sort of lower growth. And so I was curious, was that just sort of in that kindergartner group? And is there any thought to, some of the, not pre-kindergarten, but, sort of prior to kindergarten camps, sort of readiness camps, and that potentially as a strategy for that?
Yeah, so kindergarten was the area that I was highlighting specifically as they had 19% growth, where we saw much higher growth for our Hispanic and white subgroup of like 31%, right? So that's a massive gap that we don't want to ignore for our earliest opportunity for intervention. So yes, I do think that we have done work in Orange County schools around readiness for K, as well as to recognizing, right, the early intervention, but also sustained intervention that comes with Read to Achieve. So we no longer have the supportive legislation in terms of expansion of Read to Achieve. The legislation now states that we're going to focus on second and third grade. We here in OCS have opted to expand that to first grade with the option that is stated in that Senate bill. But in the past, we've had one school that was able to provide a readiness for kindergarten camp. And unfortunately, that funding doesn't seem to be available this year. But I do think that that's a conversation that we need to continue to think about, because I know that each of you, I've worked with you in the past in this work, and you value that early intervention. And we have data that says it does make a difference for kids, even if it's only for 16 days. So I share that concern with you and recognize that we have to be creative in how we're going to address that.
Are there questions for Ms. Wilson?
So thank you all for getting us the data, explaining it, and especially separating it out in the manner of what it doesn't tell us as well. One of the questions I have is, as I look across the opportunities, since we're mainly right now on elementary, one of the things that is a common theme across there is a lot of professional development. There's a lot, PLCs, we have letter training going on, we have MTSS, we have training and testing and observations in other areas. And, I go back to our equity audit report that we got, and one of the overwhelming things that came out of there is the need for self-care and feeling of being overwhelmed with resounding themes in both data and comments. So my question is, should we be looking at curriculum assistance or additional teacher assistance to help, with some of these action plans beyond the professional development? Because I just worry where we are as a district with everything that's coming back on teachers continuous. And, none of them said, additional staff, right, to help. You know, we have ESSER funds and things like that. So I'm not meaning to put you on the spot, but you know, especially at elementary where you're seeing some of the improvements and knowing, hey, if we had some additional, can we get to that next level of growth? So have y'all discussed additional resources, whether it's curriculum assistance or teaching assistants in our elementaries?
So at a previous, thank you for that, Mr. Atherton. I believe at a previous board meeting, or maybe it was a Student Achievement Committee meeting, we talked about including instructional assistants. And so I would have to go back and look to see where we are with that with regards to, I believe the board may have approved that, so I will need to go back and look at that. But yeah, that was something we certainly did broach with the board in support of our classrooms, our teachers, our students, and increasing their
Okay, because
achievement.
it definitely would help to see that in here, you know, especially when others outside of the board is reviewing this to see that we are adding resources to help as well.
Yeah, if I can add one
Sure.
thing, if I may. I think another way that we're trying to get at some of that support is really pouring into our coaches that are in schools and really building up their capacity to end the work every day, whether that be through a coaching cycle, whether that be through a modeling of a lesson, giving intentional feedback, working with PLCs, and maximizing the times that we're already collaborating with teachers to ensure that we're being intentional about how we use their time and how the ways that we're using their time match up to the work that they're trying to do in their classrooms every day. And so I think it's not another person, it's not a new support, but it's rethinking how we're utilizing the people, the resources, and the supports that are already in our buildings every day. Because we are fortunate here in Orange County Schools, and we have a lot of things, and we have a lot of people. But I can't stand here tonight and tell you that we maximize the use of any of them every day for students all the time. So we do want to be really intentional about what we're doing, why we're doing it, with all of those resources, whether it be tangible or people.
I think Ms. Crimmins wanted to speak to that question real quick.
And also to the PD question, this is the time where we're entering that planning for PD. So we are cognizant of the myriad of things that need to happen to move instruction forward. I think Ms. Wilson made a really good point about what is everyone, not just in the schools, but what is everyone doing every day to make that impact. And then we need to look at our support staff. Are they getting what they need in terms of the general education training, their content-specific training, as well as their specialty training? So, I mean, you're right, it is a lot. But as we move into this PD, being thoughtful, how can we double up PD? And I know that people have heard me say this before, but when you're talking about co-teaching, that is such a great practice that we need to use, but we can embed that into any PD that we do in order to maximize that. So those are just some comments I had.
Do we have other questions for Ms. Wilson?
Yeah,
Occupant
Karen?
Dibbles? Go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, just, first, I also want to add my thanks. Now I know why the teachers are so exhausted, because my head is spinning. So thank you. Thank you for that. I'm not sure, but thanks. And to your comment, Ms. Wilson, about the readiness, certainly we'd be interested in mini grants. We'd be interested in finding the money for that. So just please.
Yes, ma'am. We just received the confirmation that the funding would not be available through Family Success Alliance this year, which is the grant that's funded that program previously. And some investigation about other funding sources I know is already underway at the school level. And so we have not yet engaged in that conversation at the CNI team level, but definitely have that on our radar for sure.
Well, certainly in the spirit of continuation budget, this is a loss of services because of loss of county funding, and we might want to let the county know that we're going to encourage, and I know their support for the program, that this would be something to make them aware of, because maybe they'll find the money. I have a question. It's kind of aligned a little with what what Mr. Atherton is asking, and that is the role of staff disruption. We all know that it's been a tough year, right? There's been lots of disruption of staff. I don't know how that varies by school. And so the question becomes, if we have moved to a more stabilized staffing situation, I want to believe that. And if we, there's the staff disruption and the availability of sufficient MTSS support by school. And so there's a question about how has that affected these numbers and how quickly we can put something in place to change that. And then one other question, if you looked at these numbers for only our Title I schools, I was curious how they'd look.
Yeah, so I'm going to work backwards if that's okay.
Sure.
So we have looked at this data, just looking at it school by school. We provided you kind of an overview high level, but our team and school-based teams have dug way into this data, beyond composite scores, into every single measure, looking at individual children. And our school-based teams are having student data talks and talking about what's happening with specific students to ensure that there's nobody kind of falling through without our noticing, right? So I definitely, we're going to continue to do that work. Schools are going to continue to do that work. And in some venues, when it's appropriate, we can provide you that school level data. We chose not to provide it here just because you've already stated yourself, the amount of data is just, it's massive, right? And being able to go through all of that with you is just not really realistic in this setting. In terms of staff disruptions and how that impacts our data, you probably noticed on multiple slides, we stated that the data doesn't tell us always where there was a teacher that wasn't in place, where students missed chunks of instruction being out with COVID on quarantine. Those things are not represented in this data. And it is important that we acknowledge that that's a gap. And there are ways that we can go back and dig into that more. We know specific classes. I know when Mariah and myself have gone to schools doing literacy walks and meeting with their principals, we've talked about specific classrooms and trends that look different and talking about those variables. And schools have made adjustments and shifts based on that data, based on those conversations. So those are powerful pieces for us to talk about. In terms of knowing the classes that have had all of those disruptions, we would probably need to lean in a little bit with our human capital division in order to get you those specific data points, but we could do that.
Just a clarifying point? Sure. The goal is not to send you all into a rat hole of God knows what. The goal is for us to and really for our parents to understand how soon they'll see improvements with their children. Some of the PLC stuff, some of the curriculum stuff is going to take some time to take hold, but reducing the disruptions in the classroom should have pretty quick or faster results. So that's really the question is, how can, are there places where we have to stabilize the classroom?
Yeah, I think even if you look at our kindergarten, first grade data, right? We had some gaps, we put some curriculum in place, we did fidelity checks, we've done professional development, we're seeing a return on those investments. And that's happened really quick, right? That's happened from beginning of the year to middle of the year. So I think we just have to keep being really intentional, really strategic in our moves and monitoring our data to ensure that our actions are giving us the results that we want. In terms of being able to stand here and tell you when we're going to see everything shift, I don't think that I can do that. But what I can tell you is we're going to continue to implement these pieces step by step, making certain that we have our measures in place to measure our success and look for those results trending in the accurate direction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question, Ms. Wilson, that is about the third grade gains. I'm always curious about third grade, and then I'm curious about what we see in the 5th to 6th grade shift. And so, but in terms of the third grade, and so the kindergarten made really big gains, and then first and second, and then it looks like it slowed down a little bit in third grade. And so my question is kind of like, what are we comparing? What are our norms? Is this our percentiles in contrast to other districts across the state? Or is there some sort of like adaptability or versatility in kindergartners that starts to slow down by the time they get to third grade? Like, how different is what we're seeing based on our district, and how much is it typical across districts?
So in terms of kindergarten and first grade students making larger gains than our third grade students would be a typical kind of trend. Dibbles is normed nationally, so we can compare our data at both the district level, the state level. Here in North Carolina, our norms don't follow all of the same norms that are used for Dibbles across the nation. So even like some of our cut scores are a little bit different with Amplify, but we can provide you comparison in terms of like across the state of North Carolina. But what you're seeing with third graders not making as much progress over this amount of time is fairly typical.
Okay, great. Other questions for Ms. Wilson, or do people after Ms. Wilson, I believe it was Ms. Myers who talked about the middle school?
Yes,
aims?
ma'am.
That'd be great.
I have
Go
I have a
ahead,
quick
Sarah,
one.
and Sarah
It
and
should
we'll
be,
both have their hands
hopefully
up.
it's quick. Something that concerned me in the literacy audit was the students not being given grade appropriate texts in middle school and upper elementary, and especially looking at some of the Ames Web data and stuff. I'm wondering, can you just remind me, are there steps we're taking right now about that?
So we have done some professional development in PLCs with the middle schools. Miss Julie Lemansky, prior to her transition, had done some work with our secondary teachers, but also as we are looking at curriculum mapping, as we're making teachers aware of some other resources where they can pull text like Think Circa and Newsella, going back and doing some professional development opportunities about how to scale those resources. That's also part of that work, as well as adding in some fluency components that also came from the literacy audit.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Will, did you have your hand up also?
No, I was just.
Oh, okay, you were just making sure I didn't.
Thank
miss
you
Sarah.
all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wilson. Okay, I have a question for Ms. Myers, but does anyone else have a question first for her? Go ahead.
So the question I had is, sixth grade really seems
They stuck
off.
out a bit.
Right, and
They did.
I wonder if y'all looked at it from a standpoint of where they started in COVID,
We
right?
did.
Elementary, and all of a sudden they're in an environment where they should be self-sufficient. And normally in fifth grade, they get that opportunity to switch classes, understand that you're going to have mental context switching. You know, I'm just curious if you've got maybe some more insight around that grade.
We have some possible root causes for that data. And some of that conversation has revolved around the instruction that was not as strong for those students due to COVID. And so we know that our current sixth graders missed a portion of fourth grade, and then some of them missed more than others of fifth grade, depending on their ability to attend in person or their ability to attend remotely. And in our fourth and fifth grade math curriculum, we have a large portion, if any of you have fourth and fifth graders, there's a lot of fraction work, there's a lot of computation work, there's a lot of really foundational skill work around fractions, decimals, and percents. And so large portions of that may have been missed. Also, like you said, there's that kind of social emotional piece of when they return to us, goodness, did they get a welcome? They are now in middle school. And they did not have that transition that they would have had otherwise. But we also know that there were some changes made to the sixth grade math curriculum this year. And in those changes, when we were moving around some units so that we were offering more rigorous course selection for our current sixth graders, we know that changes were made in that curriculum. And so this is a great opportunity for us to have this data to say, okay, we can still offer that rigor, and that is still the right thing to do for all students. but what do we need to do to fill in that support underneath? And so we need to look at the item analysis, which is part of that data work that we're going to do, and I'm being flanked by Dr. Gammon, who will help with that math piece. And when we look at that data analysis, we'll be able to say the majority of our kids missed work in these areas. So how are we going to provide them some support to help both the COVID piece from missed instruction, but also to combat any changes that we made due to those instructional shifts in that course?
Thank you.
Yeah, and just an addition to that, so predating this data that we've looked at, we've been very much aware of middle grades, just course sequencing questions that have come up. We've provided some responses during the fall. I do think it's important to note that since the fall, we meaning myself, Jennifer Parker, who's our pre-K-12 math facilitator, middle grades math coaches that work with all 3 middle schools, as well as teachers from all 3 of our middle schools have met at least monthly. Sometimes it's been more than once each month. These have been afternoon sessions where these input sessions have been around the very things that you're asking. Where are we currently at? What are the things that they're seeing on the ground that are working, that are not working? What is the data saying, is one piece, but also what is that qualitative piece from teachers, from our AIG specialists that are in the building, from EC teachers, anybody that's working, kind of that all hands on deck with kids. So what we've done monthly is meet with them with the intent of mapping out an effective course sequencing process moving forward. We are now at a stage as of this past week where we have a final draft from a lot of iterations and reviews from that team. A beautiful thing about that process is to have 3 middle schools that can come together in a collaborative way and agree on that is really powerful. And to know that there is some give and take within that process, but we're at that stage where that draft is prepared for Dr. Felder and our district leadership team to review, and then it will be something that we would then push forward as we continue to have all eyes on that with middle grades math options moving forward. So just as an update there.
Can I ask to,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, I apologize, Mr. Atherton, 2 additional pieces and for the board as a whole. Math 180 is a targeted intervention and working with one of our middle schools looking at this Ames Web data. One of our middle schools did decide that they were going to use a large portion of their Math 180 allotments in 6th grade to help try to combat what this data is telling us our students may need. And additionally, I'm working with Jennifer Parker and the middle grades math coaches to talk about some summer opportunities to build some of those additional kind of core plan pieces that we talked about. What do we know our 6th graders are kind of missing from year to year, and especially with this data, so that we can front load some of that work with this year's 5th graders who will be our next year's 6th graders, trying to get ahead of that a little bit.
And I'm glad you said that, because one of my questions was for this, how did this transition to here? So thank you for
There
giving
it
some
is,
of that
yes.
in there.
Okay. Just to ask about math, so looking at those curriculum changes maybe also includes, I know that we've moved to not having the separate plus classes. And so is that something you're also evaluating during this time? That's this time that you're looking at that planning. Okay. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Thank you for this. Just couple questions. One is, you taught us at Student Achievement that MTSS says we need the student to show up and they need to behave before they'll learn.
We look at the whole student, and that does include behavior and our SEL competencies as well. Yes, ma'am.
And the data is suggesting that the behavioral events are improving. So, and are you seeing that, or do you expect to, are you seeing that in the student out in learning? Are you seeing that in the class, show up in the classroom?
I know that as we talk about our students kind of reacclimating to school after COVID, we have had a real challenge for all of us, including the adults in the room, to get back to where we were prior to COVID. And especially for our students who made those transitions, like to middle school and to high school, they unfortunately missed some of those kind of crucial transition years. What we know is that even though we've had some instances where some of our Behavior codes like fighting and physical aggression may have declined in some places. We've also seen some increases in some classroom behaviors in some grade levels in some schools. And so that is a larger part of our plan as we look forward to next year, our selection of our SEL core curriculum, to say that we want to make sure that we are addressing student needs in the areas of academics, but also behavior and SEL. We would love to see, and this is our hope, that with high quality core instruction in behavior, SEL, and academic areas, that we're going to start to see the negative behaviors and students who are not proficient, those numbers dropping, and our positive behaviors and our student proficiency rates rising. We would hope that they are going to happen in tandem. That is the overall overarching plan. Yes.
Thank you. Just, one of the things that's been a constant conversation in this district way before I was here, way before COVID, and that was these transition years of 6th grade and 9th grade. And there'd been some discussion about doing something parallel to what the readiness plan that was done for our elementary students. But are we looking at doing something like that for our 6th and 9th graders to get them ready for these big years?
There are conversations currently about a 6th grade kind of middle school 101 that has been in place previously. I know that in some years it was longer, it was several days, and then it was shortened in some instances. There has also been conversation about kind of a 9th grade academy, and those are conversations I think that are happening a little more large scale with like Dr. Doyle and Dr. Dawson and some of our cabinet and CNI team, but that's definitely something that we can look into and share that information with you.
Okay, and one final thing, AVID and other kind of supplemental programs like that, are we stepping those up and are they helping?
I can get Dr. Gammon to speak about AVID.
So yes, in a word, we're in a process right now with AVID where we've been working with one of our retired AVID teachers that we've brought back in the fold to assist us. What we've done this year is really just foundational work so far, where we've established district goals, which were not necessarily a strategic part of our strategic plan in the past with AVID. So we have that working right now. We're having consistent meetings with the AVID teachers, whether those are one-on-one coaching sessions, but that is to align their site team plans with that strategic goal that's going to then align with our strategic plan. That's work that in my experience, even as a principal formerly in the district, that we weren't necessarily doing at that time. I think a positive with that is really looking at AVID, not only for all that it can be, but also some very detailed pieces with, for example, math support. I mean, there are ways that you can use the tutorial process in math strategically. You can use the recruitment process with AVID strategically to provide that support during the school day, where we're not trying to go outside to look when we have something that's already built within our system. So our goal going into this summer is to send folks from all three of the middle schools as well as high schools to AVID trainings to try to ramp up that foundational knowledge again. And there will be a lot more to come with AVID. So yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Maybe that's something we can hear more about as time goes on. That sounds really terrific. Anyone have questions for Ms. Crimmins?
Just a clarification about the growth piece.
Yes.
Is that sort of like, I wish I could figure out how to explain it clearly. You know how like an M class, like the bar you're trying to reach, it changes over time. And so like growth, it's against that standard versus like growth against sort of a consistent standard. Which one?
So this is even more basic. It
Okay.
is the number of students that showed, it could be 1 point in their scale score, in their raw score, or 2 points. But any student who showed growth. Again, you heard me say, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but some of our systems, our databases, we are still working on how to extract the data for students with disabilities nimbly so that a teacher or staff can go in and really find the data. And how then do we respond and how can we show that data? Because I think that is far more powerful than saying this percentage of students grew.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nimbly being an adverb, not a data extraction program.
Yes.
It sounds like one.
Nimbly being an adverb.
Okay,
yes.
great. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, I know it's been a lot of work to do the assessments of our kids, and I was curious how many new EC students we have this year, and how are we doing with IEPs?
So I will need to get back to you with that first. That's an easy, I can find that. We are closing the number of students. I go through every day, almost every day, but I can tell you that currently we have 9 schools with less than 4 evaluations that are overdue. We have three schools with less than, or between that 5 and 9, 1 school with 15 and, no, 3 schools with 15 and 1 with over 20. We have dispatched teams to go ahead and work through that. So my goal was April 1. We're close. My goal is to be at baseline starting the next school year. We're very close. And to piggyback on your question, students who did qualify and miss the 90-day eligibility window, that we can complete that. They will have be offered compensatory services this summer.
Great. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Will.
So one of the questions I was thinking about as you were explaining
Sure.
all of this was, are we engaging parents differently as we go through this, as we talk about, here are some of the, specially designed instruction, and are we engaging differently, or have we thought about that?
That's a good question. I think during COVID, we engaged our parents more. So through the virtual, we got to see into their homes. And I find that when I get parent phone calls, we are able to have deeper conversations with a different level of understanding. And it's hard to explain. I do think the relationships between the teachers and the parents is deeper than beforehand. So we are having conversations about what are the instructional practices. I am hearing that more in the very limited IEP meetings that I attend, because I should not be there. But I do hear, they're talking about, yes, in the Hill RAP, we're doing this in corrective. So I'm hearing that language more and more.
And the other question I had is, in the inclusion classes,
Yes.
are we approaching curriculum differently? One of the big changes that I saw was introducing Letterland into those classroom settings. Are there other things that we're doing to kind of change the approach?
So in 2 of our middle schools right now, they are going through some very intentional PD on co-teaching. So it may not be the materials, although we want differentiation to meet the goals. It's also the methodology and co-teaching. And so Miss Emily Lewis, who is our multi-language learner facilitator, and Marianne Baldwin, who's one of the EC program specialists, they have done some deep work at Gravelly Hill and A.L. Standback. And Miss Wilson just did an observation of the co-teaching going on. And so they are going, again, into the PLC, maximizing that time that teachers have to have embedded PD, and then observing, giving feedback. And I know that Miss Wilson was just.
Yeah, it's, I had the opportunity to observe it over at Gravelly Hill. And I was, really impressed at the process that they've established. They have a rubric that they're looking at. They're going into classes, they're observing the co-teaching through the lens of this rubric, looking at, how the general education teacher is getting at this work, how the co-teacher in that classroom, the classroom I observed happened to be an EC teacher that was co-teaching with a gen ed teacher for ELA. And then Emily and Marianne go back and they have this conversation about their rubrics independently. And then they develop some grows and glows that they share with the teachers. Both teachers get the same feedback. They meet with those teachers and go through kind of the next steps. And then the final piece that I think is really hitting it home is that there's then a conversation with the principal about how things are looking, not only in this classroom, but across the building, and celebrating the things that are going really well, but also giving them a couple of nuggets that they can focus on as they're walking classrooms and they're giving feedback, so that teachers are hearing a consistent message from all of the people that are walking in their classrooms.
And the reason I asked Ambra to come up is I think you saw throughout other presentations today the connection between EC and multi-language learners, or special education students and multi-language learners. And so it's no longer the EC department takes care of EC and literacy takes care of literacy. We are now all working so closely. Our teachers are starting to feel that. Because if Ms. Baldwin and Ms. Lewis could go in and support a gen ed teacher with the guidance. So it's, I feel that it's working better, and there's much more connection between things.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Crimmins. We have Brenda.
I would just please let me acknowledge here the incredible amount of work. Incredible amount of work, and the presentation was stellar. And I know that you all have done the work, but I'd like to also say that I appreciate the work that the classroom teachers are doing as well, because they're right there. So I just didn't want the night to pass without saying I appreciate the amount of work that you all have put into this.
Well, we do the work for the teachers and for the children and for the families. So thank you for acknowledging them, as we do every day, probably not enough, but thank you.
And as we are approaching 9 o'clock, if we can save some time for our high school discussion. Bonnie, do you have a last thing you would say?
I told.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Questions, Sarah?
I was very excited to see the progress across some of these EOCs. Very, very excited. And yeah, so that's great. And my only question is I'm excited that there will be work to create more formative assessments at the high school level. And it struck me that that might be trickier in English than it is in the other. I don't know enough about the high school curriculum, but it seems like teachers may have their own books they like to teach and stuff like that. So could you just sort of speak to how that's gonna work?
Sure. In the high school English classroom, there's been a shift since we've probably all been in the classroom away from teaching certain novels or texts within the canon towards a standards-based movement. So the primary goal of the high school English teacher is to align their instruction with the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, and the texts are actually flexible, so that we don't require, like we once did, that in 9th grade you read To Kill a Mockingbird, Romeo and Juliet, etc. Now, that still, there are prevalent texts still used. However, the focus is not the plot and what happens, but it's how the student interacts with the text driven by standards aligned instruction. And so those common formative assessments are, what are our essential standards that our English 2 students must know in order to go be successful in English 3? So the PLC determines those, what we call power standards. And then how will we know when students know that? So we design common formative assessments that measure when students know. Once we collect that data, what do we do with our students who have mastered that to push them and accelerate and add rigor? And then how do we modify and change instruction to go back and reteach for the students who did not master it? And in a well-functioning PLC, that process is happening throughout the semester, and they're going through those power standards that have been designed by the PLC.
Great, thank you.
Great. I have a question about the curriculum mapping summer plan and the recruiting teacher leaders, and I was curious if they're getting paid to do that. Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions, Bonnie?
Yeah, first it sounds like really bad news for Cliff Notes.
Don't buy stock.
Anyway, could you talk, the rumor mill is like screaming with behavioral stuff in the high schools. I was wondering if you could talk to what's happening with behavior and,
That's going to be an SE. We do SEL next.
well, I guess I can't, I guess behavior ties to academics. So I'm wondering, that's why I wanted to.
You're right. Behavior and academics do go hand in hand, and that's why that MTSS structure is so important to understand when behaviors are being driven by instructional deficits that the student is compensating for. And so I would say that's an ongoing process that we almost expect possibly to be a little bit exacerbated this year because of the gap students are bringing from both the SEL world and the academic world. However, we believe that engaging instruction can solve a lot of these issues within the classroom when you're looking at classroom infractions and things of that nature. So creating that equitable, engaging instruction is so vitally important so our students can have positive identities within the classroom and connect the instruction with who they are as human beings.
Okay. Edit? All right. Thank you so much to your team for your presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, team. And so next up will be Ms. Sharita Cobb and Dr. Doyle. And in keeping with our Goal 1 data presentation, data review, they will present SEL and discipline data as well as data from the Panorama survey.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Board of Education, and Superintendent Felder. It's my pleasure to present our discipline data. I want to acknowledge that there is data that has been placed in the board's agenda item that goes a lot deeper into the work that's being done with our discipline, as well as with the data that we're receiving from perception surveys of our school culture and climate that we have administered from Panorama. So if there's additional detail that is sought, that detail is in that agenda item, as well as one of the activities that we have started to do with our school leaders at our leadership training. Just a reference that as the work that we have been undergoing all school year is aligned to our district strategic plan, the work that each school is doing is aligned to their school improvement plan, and that is directly correlated with what's happening at the district level. We see our role, and I think that you saw it with the curriculum instruction team, and you'll hear it from our student services team, that our work is to provide resources, services, processes, improved processes, and support. We don't teach the students, and we don't exact or provide disciplinary consequences. It's our job to provide those resources to teachers and school leaders so that they can be more successful in helping our students to be more successful. And so we want to honor and acknowledge that. And so the first section of our presentation is on what's going on with student discipline up until the end of the first semester. As I said previously, the Board of Education has received this data, and this will kind of go into the deeper dive of how we've looked at that data and what we're doing to provide resources, services, products, and support to our schools. The first graph just shows the number of discipline incidents that we have had in the entire district for each month of the school year, recognizing that we start as early as July with our year-round school, and this goes until January 20th of the current calendar year. What you see here is kind of what's expected, right? There's an additional amount of disciplinary incidents in the middle of this first semester, but it's really correlated to the number of days of in-person instruction that we have. In the months where you see that disciplinary set of incidents decrease, it's because we have more days where we're not in session. January was particularly challenged because not only did we have exams happening at the high school level, but we also had a great deal of bad weather and canceled school as a result. So we first look at this data to see, is there any trends about something, things that are going on in kind of a global sense. So we start at a big macro level, and then we start to bring it down to a more narrow focus. You'll see that this data is broken down by the specific incidents. And again, this is at the district-wide level. And we'll get to a further breakdown by grade span in the next couple of slides. As a number of the questions that the board has asked this evening directed at curriculum instruction really apply to us as well. And that really is, how do we make sure that we narrow the focus and that we're not overloading our school teachers, our school leaders with multiple different initiatives all at once? Our goal is to see improvement in this data, and obviously all of us would want to see the improvement immediately and to eliminate all disciplinary referrals and improve achievement to 100%. But we know that that's going to happen as a process of continuous improvement. It's not going to be immediate. And if it is, it's probably not going to be very lasting. And so as we help our schools to really focus in on what's the most important high leverage strategy that we could implement to improve these outcomes, that's our first task, is to look at our data and say, what's the highest incident or highest frequency behavioral issue? And for the entire district, surprisingly, it's attendance. And please know that attendance is broken down into tardiness, skipping class, that kind of thing. In addition, the next highest frequency incident is aggression. As someone mentioned, I believe, there has been a discussion of students being aggressive, and I would say that that's probably to be expected after all that they have been through and all we have kind of been through as a community, as a state, and as a globe. And so those aggressive behaviors are also categorized broadly. So aggressive behavior could be using language that's aggressive, but it could also be up to fighting. So we did categorize this data, and that was based on feedback that we received from our parent group. And then finally, the third highest incident of infractions are classroom level infractions. And as we looked at this data, we have to kind of acknowledge that the first one, attendance, and the last one, classroom infractions, of the top three priorities really are related to student engagement. Are students engaged in their classrooms? Are they interested in sitting there with us and being a part of the instruction so that they can learn? Now, does that mean that instruction is poor or anything like that? No, but it does mean that, and it points to specific strategies, and among them, one of the most priority level of strategies is culturally engaged instruction, culturally relevant instruction. And so that is work that is ongoing in the district, again, on a global scale. And as you heard the curriculum instruction team, it is work that they are doing to begin to implement into our pacing guides and into the resources that we're selecting for students, both on the curriculum instruction side, and that is feedback we've received as we are going through the process to select a social and emotional learning curriculum, that we want to have a culturally relevant curriculum for that purpose as well. Again, this is the entire district, K through 12. What you'll see in the next three slides is a breakdown from high school, or elementary, middle, and high school. This is elementary. What you'll notice here is that the priority area, the highest frequency incident for elementary students, is fighting and physical aggression. Again, one of the things that we received in terms of feedback from our school leaders as we shared this data with them, which is totally valid, is I may describe physical aggression or fighting differently at the elementary level than you may describe it. If I push Ms. Cobb over here and I'm horseplaying, someone may define that as fighting, when for me as a child, it may just be horseplay, right? And so it's really important that at the school level that we do some work to really systematically define and consistently reinforce what the definitions of these infractions are, so that we're not inadvertently being biased in how we exact or name the incident, as well as the consequences for those incidents. The second highest frequency is disrespect and noncompliance. Again, those two are related. And then third in elementary is also our classroom infractions. As we get to our middle grades, we see again a similar trend at the middle grades: fighting and physical aggression. Classroom infractions rises to the second place at middle grades, and then disrespect and noncompliance is third. So again, you're seeing some consistencies, but you're also seeing the change in these incidents as the grade span gets higher. Finally, in high school, the big incident, and it's to me, this is very remarkable for a number of reasons. One, the number of incidents at the high school is relatively or comparatively low. And I don't want to say that discipline in general is low, but as you look at, if you took away all of the attendance issues, it's significantly lower than every other grade span. And so how can we address that issue of making sure that students want to be in class, that they can get to school on time, because much of this is tardiness, but then once they're there, that they stay in class and they go to each of their 4 class periods. And so these are issues that we want our schools to be digging deeper into. So our approach is, first, what are the highest frequency infractions, and how do we work on those high frequency of infractions? At the secondary level, high school specifically, focusing on attendance will get a huge return. And there's work already going on at both of our 2 comprehensive high schools to reduce incidents of attendance violations from tardiness to skipping. At the other levels, it's really focusing on what's going on with physical aggression and what's going on in classrooms that's making students not want to be engaged in those lessons, or causing them to be referred out to the office for those purposes. Finally, but the next question that we began asking ourselves is, what does our data look like in proportion to the percentage of students that are represented in our entire school system? And what you'll see here is a breakdown of our enrollment. So what percentage of our total enrollment are our racial and ethnic groups, and then what percentage of our disciplinary infractions are also represented by those groups. And what you see here is, again, and this is consistent with the data that we're seeing in curriculum instruction, is this disproportionality, particularly in disciplinary incidents with Black students and students who are categorized in our disciplinary system as multiracial. And so that data is very important for us, because in addition to focusing on the frequency of the highest frequency incidents, we also need to address where are we having some disproportionality, where, for example, if 2 students, just using Ms. Cobb and myself as examples, if both of us are exhibiting the same behaviors, are we having the same referral rate, and are we having the same consequences as a result? We would hope so, right? Understanding that there's a lot of nuance there. Because Ms. Cobb and myself it looks like we're doing the same thing in terms of behavior, but there could be other circumstances that mitigate how that consequence might come to conclusion. But this is important data for us as well, because it's also a high leverage way that we can start to chip away and get significant improvement with even some basic awareness. For example, a great deal of the research around around this topic talks about really educating our students and our staff first about microaggressions. Our superintendent has really been pushing on this issue and ensuring that our staff is providing that training. And that has begun in our district and is going to assist in bringing awareness to this issue, as well as not only awareness for our staff, but beginning to bring that awareness to our students as well. And so when they become aware of microaggressions that they may be exhibiting, we all do it, every single one of us, and understanding when that's happening, understanding how to limit or correct, self-monitor our behaviors so that we can reduce the amount of negative interactions that we're having with each other, but also with our students in particular, then we can maybe stop these infractions as well. Finally, we kind of did a combination of this data in the first set of slides, as well as the disproportionality. And so we began to look at what's the highest frequency incidence for those groups, Black and multiracial, of disciplinary incidents for those specific groups. Well, what we see is that attendance, again, aggression and classroom infractions are the same thing. They're just overrepresented for those 2 groups. And so our next steps really have been targeted towards this data and being specific as we start looking at each of the grade spans, elementary, middle, and high schools, saying, are there trends among those grade spans? And for some of them, there are. And I cannot see that slide at all. So our opportunities for improvement, and this was the approach that we have been taking for the last several months, is as we look at our data, what's the opportunity for improvement? Well, first, I want to celebrate, although we did not document that on our slide, that our referrals are reduced, and that has been something that's acknowledged. But we are seeing, although we have a less number of frequency of referrals, some of the incidents that we're seeing are much more dramatic than we've seen in the past. And we have to acknowledge that. And we have to also honor that our students have been through a great deal of stress, and trying to figure out the strategies to mitigate that is no easy task. Our schools are struggling with it. We are struggling as well, because these are very complex issues that none of us has experienced previously. But our school-based teams, as well as our district-based teams, are really working to provide every bit of support that we can for these students. As we look at the opportunities for improvement, our highest source of disciplinary referrals are attendance infractions. And so we felt like one of the best things that we can do is go directly to those two schools, our two comprehensive high schools, which is the highest number of our students, and work with those goal teams specifically. So in the next month, right after spring break, we'll be going to those goal teams, reviewing this data with them, reviewing the research, and having them engage in some root cause analysis. As they look at their own data, what do they see and what do they know in the context of their school campus? There's going to be probably a very different situation at Cedar Ridge High School than there will be at Orange High School, and that's fine. Our job and our goal in going there to help facilitate that work is, one, to expose them to the research around these topics, but also to provide support to them, to allow them to analyze this data very efficiently so that they can start taking some actions as we end the school year and build some momentum for next school year. Another opportunity is the overrepresentation of Black and multiracial students in our disciplinary data. We've begun this work already. As we had our leadership team meeting this past week for the month of March, we did this very same presentation with our schools, with the exception of we gave them their school level data that showed the disproportionality of their referrals, and then asked them to engage in a root cause analysis as a peer group. So all of the elementary schools, all of the middle schools, and all the high schools did a root cause analysis using a quality tool called the Fishbone. And then they're going to take that tool back and do it with their own school. I've already had one school report to me today, made the opportunity to report that one of the rules that we said about their use of this tool was they had to think about root causes that were in the school's control. We spend a lot of time thinking about all the things outside of our schoolhouses that contribute to the problems that we encounter in our buildings. We have very little control over those things, but we have so much more control over the things that happen in our building. We have control over how we supervise, how many teachers are out in common areas during passing periods. We have opportunities to create relationships with our students. We spend most of their waking hours with them. So what do we have in our control? And what causes can we see in our environment that will assist us in mitigating some of these challenges? As we think about middle grades, for example, one of the biggest structural things we can do is to change how students pass in the hallways. Is the entire school changing classes at the same time? That's not always the best practice in the middle grades. Letting sixth grade change classes at a different time that seventh grade does, or eighth grade, may be a strategy that a school selects if there's an issue in a particular part of the building or with a particular type of time of the day, during lunch, during more active periods of the school day. So those are the types of things that we want them to start looking at. So what are the root causes of the disproportionality? So that would mean they would have to take their data and look at the data in a way that we have. What are the key incidents? What time are they having? And they have that data in a way that allows them to get even deeper than we've presented here. And so they will present those fishbone diagrams back to us, and then we will take what they have identified, look for trends in their own root causes to provide additional support, resources, products, and services. And then finally, student engagement is one of the root causes that we've identified of incidents with attendance and with classroom infractions. And so providing training on And I'm sorry, I've got to go closer to the screen. I'm old.
There's a reason for that, that's right. There's a reason.
Not
For
wearing your
creating
glasses.
consistent behavior management systems. I apologize, this is an old person's body and definitely old person's eyeballs. Specifically focused on our attendance infractions, our aggression, and our classroom infractions. So we want to make sure that we're consistent in our behavioral plans. And not just consistent in, we have a student handbook, we have in Orange County a code of conduct, character, and support. But each classroom needs to have a behavioral plan that allows students to understand the expectations in the classroom and what the consequences are for when an infraction occurs, with the goal of first conferencing with the students and having a progressive discipline that students have the opportunity to mitigate those issues in the classroom before they're referred to the office. So those are our top 3 opportunities for improvement, and that is our work with student discipline. And I'll take questions before I turn it over to Ms. Cobb for our sharing of the perception data from Panorama.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doyle. And I know we're low on time because we also have to return to closed session. But what really stood out to me was the student engagement as the root cause of incidents with both attendance and classroom infractions. Thank you so much for highlighting that. Board members with brief, one each. How about Will?
I'll limit it to one. So one of the questions I have is, one of the big efforts that the board undertook was the code of conduct, character, and support. And we had a huge plan of education, rolling that out, how to use the chart, how to interpret it, and pandemic hit.
Yes, sir.
So I'm curious if we're going to go back and try to redo that, reintroduce it, and then feed back into, hey, where do we miss? So I just curious if that's the larger plan.
Yes, and that's really kind of what we're talking about in terms of a consistent. So that's our work at the district level, is trying to help each grade span define what those infractions look like, because obviously what something looks like at the high school level would be different than elementary, that type of thing. But we also need to be consistent around all of our elementary schools, all of our middle schools, and of our high schools. And so that is definitely work that will restart. And please know that our principals have asked for it, so I appreciate that feedback.
Thank you.
Sarah and then Bonnie.
Easy one. Have you looked at the incidents in terms of the number of students? Because I have heard
Yes.
that there's some repeat offenders, if you will.
There are, absolutely. And with, in an attempt to maybe not identify students, absolutely that's the case. And that's why it's really important for the school to do their own root cause analysis, because as they look at their data, they may say, well, there's this one student who's responsible for 10 of our incidents. That's not the case, but I'm just using a round number. However, in the same conversation with a principal that I had today, who was reporting that they'd already done the fishbone diagram, one of the things that they came to as they were looking at their data, which this is the profound discussion that really has got to happen at our schools, was we have X number of Black males in our school, and they have been, 40% of them have been referred for discipline. That's an overrepresentation. So it's not just Black students, it's Black male students. And that conversation was a rich dialogue for them, a difficult one, but a rich dialogue. And so that's the type of conversation that really needs to happen on campuses, and that will help to inform us about what professional development and support we can provide to them.
Sarah.
Well, I just really appreciate the voiceover, because I think it gave so much context for the graphs that you shared, and just the thoughtfulness, really appreciate it. And I think this is just a comment really, which is, I am just so convinced, I think your point around student engagement is so right, and that so much of that is about relationships and whether teachers have relationships with kids, which we haven't looked at the Panorama data yet, but that's it, like that's the thing. And so okay, so I'm going to turn it into a question, which is, are we looking at things like the master schedule and having advisory periods, or like, how are we, because you hear from kids about the teachers who are building those relationships, but when that's not true for a student, it can make a huge difference. So.
And I'll say two things on that. Thank you so much for that question. One school in particular, and I'll use the high school, Mr. Johnson and I have been having a number of discussions about the block schedule on their campus. And one of the, I think, byproducts of what happened during the pandemic was teachers got into a mode of instruction through a computer that they have not totally translated out of in some regards. And because the class periods were abbreviated during remote instruction, they haven't transitioned back as quickly, which is totally understandable. Because in addition to all of that transition of just instruction, there's been transition of so many other things in terms of the operations of making sure that COVID is not spreading in their classrooms and mitigation and that type of thing. So his work is really starting to begin to think about what that means. We have not had specific conversations about advisory, although the structures of advisory of Freshman Academy and actually other theme or career academies are other ways to make the instruction at the secondary level much more relevant, and that's all research informed. But you're absolutely right that the relationship piece is really a critical one. As we start to think about those relationships, we've got to work on ourselves first, and we've got to help our adults really think about their own self-care, I think, in some regards. And I think that will begin to help us inform the work that's happening with students. In addition, as we start doing this analysis and the root cause analysis, as I've already heard, and as we heard during the work with our school-based teams, the elementary, the middle, and the high school teams last week, they're already identifying things like relationships, even just natural bias that they are bringing into, they just have from their upbringing and, that type of thing as root causes, which again are correlated directly to the research and will begin to help us thinking about our work and engagement with students differently.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer, Hillary, Brenda, everybody good? All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Doyle.
Could I take a moment of personal privilege?
Yes.
Dr. Felder, I just want to say that Ms. Cobb has been really, really excited today about the fact that I was going to do this to her one last time today. But I cannot say enough how much of a privilege it's been to work with her. And I hope that I get her upset a little bit so that it messes her up. I'm just joking. She is one fine human being, and it has been a blessing to work with her in Orange County Schools, and I appreciate her.
Thank you. Please stop. Megan knows that I will cry. I am a crybaby.
Let's keep going.
No, don't do that. Thank you. And thank you. It has been a privilege to work here and with all of you. You all are a wonderful group of people who are focused on kids, which I think is awesome. So we are going to talk about the Panorama Survey, and this survey of student perceptions around SEL competencies, being back to school, well-being, school climate, and equity. So we will begin by looking at the 2021-22 Panorama Survey results. And as we begin this, it will be a comparison of that to the 2020-2021 Winter Panorama Survey as well. So we are comparing apples to apples because this survey was given in the fall or in the winter months of 2020-2021. And so the first thing we want to focus on is that when we gave that survey in 2020-2021, the grade levels and the participation rates, and you will see that we did have a increase in our participation rates, except in our 6th through 8th grade. We did see a shortfall in the 2021-2022 survey for our 6th through 8th graders, but in all the other areas, we did see an increase in student completion of those surveys. And when we compare those results, the social emotional learning, looking at student support and environment and equity, what supports and resources were provided as a result of that, the schools in the district began using SEL curriculum and activities more appropriately and consistently, and they were using restorative practices, circles, activities, and questioning protocol. There was minimal impact, though, at that time because there was not a consistent SEL curriculum in place, as we've talked about, and we are working on that. And the staff spend and continue to spend a great amount of time with mental health supports, which distracts from the ability to provide consistent SEL support to students within our school.
Excuse me.
Yes,
This is
ma'am.
a good point for me to jump in.
Mhm.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we extend for 15 minutes.
Okay.
Second?
A motion from Ms. Stevens, a second from Ms. Smiley. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Cobb.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. So our next slide, we'll begin looking at our elementary results from this survey. And again, it will be a comparison of the 2020, 2021 to 2021, 2022. Keep in mind, though, and I want to say this before I begin, that as a result of COVID, some of our students are experiencing high school for the very first time in like the 10th grade. So they never got that 9th grade experience to really get to know their teachers or their teachers to get to know them, which goes back to what Dr. Doyle was saying about building those relationships. It's hard to build those relationships going into the 10th grade or the 11th grade, but I've never been in this building as a student. Now I'm trying to move around this building, learn this space and this environment, as well as get to know these teachers who are also struggling with being back in the building and getting back on that routine and consistent track that they were on prior to COVID. So our first survey question, when we compared apples to apples, when teachers asked, how are you? How often do you feel that your teacher really wants to know your answer? So we saw that this year, we had 67% of the students who responded favorably, and that's down to, that's an increase of 2 percentage points. But the thing to keep in mind, if it's only 67%, that means that there are 23% that don't feel that way. So when we're looking at this data, we are looking at, yes, this number may have risen or fallen, but what is the other side of that, okay? How respectful is your teacher towards you? This year, we saw 85% of the students that responded favorably were only 91% responded favorably in the past survey. So there was a drop of 6 percentage points. Did it move? All right. So how excited would you be to have your teacher again? Think about some of our students that we're asking this question. This is their first time with some of these teachers, getting to know them, being back in the building. They're nervous, they're scared. This is not what they're used to. Their learning style may have changed over the course of the time when we were in COVID. So we had 78% responded favorably, where in the past we had 82% respond favorably. How much support do the adults at your school give you? 76% responded favorably, in comparison to 81% previous years. How well do people at your school understand you as a person? This one really gets at our SEL, and we only had 57% of our students responded favorably. In the past, it was 64%, so there was a 7 percentage point drop in students feeling like people understand them as a person. Overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? 69% of the students responded favorably. That was an 8 percentage point drop from previous year, where it was 77%. And how much respect do students at your school show you? 60% of the students that responded favorably, and that was down 3 percentage points from 63 last year. And now these are all our 3 through 5th grade students. These are all 3 through 5th grade students in that survey responding. Our secondary data, it is a comparison again. How often do you have classes with students from different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds? And that was only a 1 percentage point drop Increase, we had 79%, where last year it was 78%. How often do you spend time at school with students from different races, ethnicities, or cultures? 71 percentage points is where we landed this year, where last year it was 65% of the students responded favorably. So we had a 6 percentage point increase with our middle and high school students. How fairly do adults at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures? We saw a 7 percentage point decrease from 89% to 82%. How fairly do students at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures? We saw a 10-point decrease from 69% to, from 69% to 79%. How connected do you feel to the adults at your school? And this one really looks at and hits home when we look at our SEL and what we're doing and the relationships we need to build. Because our students responded this year, 24%. Only 24% of the students who responded to the survey responded favorably about being connected to adults at their school. And that was a 9 percentage point drop from 35% last year. How well do people at your school understand you as a person? There was an 11 percentage point drop from 32%, and it was 43% last year. How much do you matter to others at this school? There are 34% of the students responded favorably, and that was a 4 percentage point drop from last year. How much respect do students in your school show you? 46% of the students responded favorably, and it was 50% last year. How many of your teachers are respectful towards you? There was a 6 percentage point drop from 97 percentage points to 91%. Overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? This year, the students responded 46%. Last year, it was 58%. How many of your teachers would you be excited to have again in the future? 50% of the students responded favorably, stating they would like to have their teacher again in the future. And that was a 15 percentage point drop from last year, where it was 65%. When your teacher asks, "How are you doing?" how many of them are really interested in your answer? This year, 55% of our students responded favorably, and last year, it was 75%. How often do your teachers seem excited to be teaching your classes? This year, 58% of the students responded favorably, and last year, 74% of the students responded favorably. And when asked overall how they felt about their school climate, 56% of the students responded favorably. So what does that all say? Our next steps, analysis of that data. Again, keeping in mind all that we have endured as far as COVID is concerned, the changes that students are experiencing, being in some of our buildings for the first time, in new grades with all that is going on. What we see as opportunities for improvement are, first of all, a core SEL curriculum that is consistent. And the strategies is the team is in the process. We are developing a rubric for selection of a district-wide program, and we're looking at developing whether or not we want it to be, or we need for it to be, a K-12 program, one that is K-6 or K-5, one that is 6-8, one that is 9-12, or is there a program out there that would fit the mold? But whatever the program is, we are trying to make sure that it's one that fits for Orange County schools. So in selection, we've met with parent groups, we've met with teachers, as well as school administration, to have their say on what does that look like and what will fit for our students. Also, an opportunity for improvement is a clear understanding of SEL integration across content areas, and that would be with all teachers. Not anything new, but just integrating what we already know is working and that we're already doing. The need to engage stakeholders to strengthen SEL and mental health promotion. Focus groups to help decide what is needed in a SEL program for the district, which I was just speaking about, which included and will continue to include teachers, parents, and central office staff. And a consistent use of the survey data for identification of areas of support and need for our Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. And that can be done through the Panorama Survey and the contract that we presently have, where we do a district-wide survey, but schools do have access to be able to do smaller, more precision surveys that are consistent with what they are seeing as a need in their building. So they are able to do some strategies, come back, do the survey, and see if those strategies are working, and if they're not, then what is the next step and how do we change over to what will work for our students? Questions?
Ms. Cobb. I know we're gonna have to keep our questions really brief and maybe need to extend again, but we might have a couple quick ones. Will, and then Sarah.
One question I had is, as I look through the data, and, see our students struggling, one of the questions that comes to my mind is, we've had a lot of turnover, we have some substitutes. Do we know if, I don't want to say that's the issue, right? But do we have a view of how many that might be that is part of this? Do we think it's 10% of the survey data, or any feelings on it?
I really can't say if what percentage that is, but what you make a very good point, which is why we try to, like at the beginning of the year, provide SEL activities and strategies, curriculum for staff to be able to use that shows this is what we're doing. And we're also asking administration to model that in their meetings. So it makes it more commonplace for them to be doing those things within the building, because that's the way that they're going to grow as far as relationships with students are concerned.
All right, thank you.
But we can check into that and see.
Thank you very much for this. I'm really glad we're doing Panorama. One thing I noticed, I have like a hypothesis about some of the data, which is, in last year, in the drops in 6 to 12, last year, there were like 1/3 of this year's number of students who took it. And so it might be that there were patterns in who took it last year, right? Teachers who were sort of more concerned already about student social emotional well-being or whatever. So it could be that some of those declines are just because it's such a different number and group of people who took the survey. So which makes me just think like it's just so important to focus on what we know about where we are right now, which is like a lot more comprehensive. The question I have, I know you were also working semi-related on additional school-based mental health services and potentially like more contracted services there. What's sort of the latest status of that? And
so yes, we've met with a couple of companies, and what they've said to us is, oh yes, we're on board, but we want to start in August, because most people are stretched out to the limit. They don't have room. Even our present company is constantly interviewing and bringing on new staff, and it's still not necessarily always enough, right? So, and some of the cases are becoming so severe that it's still not enough. So we are working with outside individuals and groups to, refer our students out so that it's not just our school base, because we recognize that sometimes that's not going to be enough. But we are still interviewing, and we have one that we definitely are on, and we have, we're getting the MOU in place so that in August, they will be ready to go. So we would have
your work
to.
on that. Thank you very much.
Bonnie.
So thanks, this is really interesting. So just to build on something that Sarah mentioned is the number of high school students tripled from the last year, and just curious how that affected the data. If I just kind of put it all together, you could. I also heard you say that our schools could actually drill down to this data so they can pull their MTSS Tier 2 and 3 students and see how they responded. So hopefully that disengagement and behavior, they can actually, that is.
Yes, ma'am. And then give
fantastic.
smaller surveys along the way, so it doesn't have to be a district-wide one. So we've given access to all administration, student support counselors, social workers, and specific teachers that are on some of the CCR teams with the staff, so that they can drill down into that data. Yes, ma'am.
That's really powerful. That's fantastic. So here's my essential question is, what is the difference? And Will kind of asks, what is it, or how does this, the code of conduct fit with the SEL curriculum? And what is the difference? Because I know we have the code of conduct already. There's some implementation, as I understand, that has to be done with it. But what does that do versus SEL curriculum? So, and how do they fit together?
So the code of conduct is set up to really support the work that we are doing in an MTSS fashion, in a tiered fashion. And there are some things based on the code of conduct that need to be dealt with and handled at the classroom level, that never move out of the classroom level, that would entice the teacher to do things in the classroom, pull in parent support, and build a relationship with that student, set a plan in place of support for that kid in the classroom without it moving to an administrative level. The SEL portion of that is that the SEL work is supposed to draw the student and the staff together a little closer so that student can express to staff, what is the root cause of my behavior? Why is my behavior what it is? Where the student code of conduct is going to give the teacher, the staff person, strategies to support the kid while they work through whatever that root cause is. Be it counseling that is needed, or I need preferential seating, whatever the case may be, this is how those two work together to support the student academically and behaviorally.
Thank you. And we need to extend the meeting again, and I believe we need to include time to return to closed session and come back and adjourn in open session. So I think we might need.
You need like 30 minutes?
I think so.
So I'm going to make a motion that we extend by 30 minutes to include closed session. And if we don't complete, I would say have it virtual, not just keep staying here all night.
Motion from Ms. Stevens, second from Ms. McKenzie. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's everybody? All right. Ms. McKenzie. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Cobb.
And I think, Con?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Doyle and Ms. Cobb.
Thank you,
All right.
tag team.
All right, well, we're gonna fly through this, but get you the key information that you need. So again, good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Board, Community. We're excited to be presenting and giving you an update on our second year of the OCS Summer Scholars Academy. So this first slide, again, is just to verify where the sites are. And this summer, we will only be holding our programs at the sites listed here due to the number of schools with capital improvement projects. As a result, we will only be able to invite eligible students to participate. Eligibility criteria are based on legislative requirements for RTA, or the Read to Achieve Camp, and for summer scholars. The eligibility is focused on students needing the most intervention. With teachers needing time to rejuvenate, the number of weeks was reduced from a 6-week program to 4 weeks. To share the details of the dates and times is Ms. Wilson. Just click it, that's fine.
Okay, so on this slide, you can see the various camps that are part of Summer Scholars. And under that umbrella is Read to Achieve. So oftentimes we hear those terms used interchangeably, and really they are separate camps. So we've tried to kind of explain here the different dates and who's being served in the different camps as well under the Summer Scholars umbrella. So our CNI team did take feedback from last year's Summer Scholars program from both our staff as well as families, and we developed a draft plan that was taken to a team of 39 representatives that was comprised of teachers, administrators, teacher assistants, operations staff, district staff, social workers, counselors, and the CNI team members to discuss plans. Revisions were made to the original draft schedule that are reflected here in these plans. You will notice that the RTA and Summer Scholars Camp schedules are Monday through Thursday to appeal to our staff, but we also are providing Friday care so that it's appealing to families. The daily schedule will be from 8 to 2:30 for the traditional calendars, but again, that's appealing to staff, and so we tacked on the after-school component to ensure that we are providing the support that families need. And parents will be submitting they received their initial eligibility letters, and they will be returning those this week. So we will have better projections and numbers to be able to move forward with our staffing plans. Please note that Hillsborough has Read to Achieve Camp in June, and we were able to develop a schedule so that Hillsborough Elementary will actually get their entire Read to Achieve Camp in the summer, and they will not have to do that work during their intersession, and that will provide us with more consistent data in the way that we're collecting that. And they will have their 72 hours of literacy instruction with a few hours actually of grace in case anything happens. We will meet that legislation requirement. Their camp will be only 3 weeks, but it will be Monday through Friday, and it's 30 minutes longer each day. So that's the reasoning for that, so that we can meet the legislation requirements. Next slide, please. Really quickly, these are some of the staffing and payroll recommendations that came out of our meeting with the 39 representatives to ensure that we have the appropriate staff to create the safe, learning, supportive environment that we know our students need, both within the school year, but also in the summer. So you see that there are counselors and social workers and nurses, site administrators, teachers, teacher assistants, clerical support, substitute teachers, DLCs and media specialists, SROs. All of these people are being included in this work because we know that it takes all of these people to create the appropriate learning environments that our students need and to give them the support to be successful. On the right-hand side of this slide, you see some of the work requirements. We're asking for staff to work all the weeks, for the whole time, at shorter days. We think that consistency is really important for students. It's also really helpful for us when you're running a 4-week program and you have to get everybody hired through human capital and you have to get them paid through payroll. So there's a lot of pieces of that, but mostly that's being driven by our students need consistency. We just had a conversation about relationships and the power of that. And we will be, working with our students that are most at risk or are demonstrating the most need. So we want to be really intentional in that work and support this summer.
All right, and where are we now? So while we wait for additional student progress to finalize our eligible student list, the CNI team is continuing with the planning. So instructional resources and lessons to align with the theme for each week are being planned. Materials and supplies have been ordered for each site. Letters have been distributed to students who, at this time, meet the eligibility criteria, and due dates for parents to notify, or the due date for parents to notify us if their child will be attending is based on eligibility, is Friday, March 25th. Schools will continue to reach out as we are able to finalize eligibility. So it is an ongoing process, and we will do the best. We will do our best and get as many kids in who meet that criteria so that they have a fruitful summer experience. And now to share an update on the specific CTE summer program, here is Ms. Wilson, who is presenting Ms. Braxton's information.
Yes, let's be clear, I will probably not be able to answer all of your questions about the CTE programming, and I am providing the information that I was given. But Shannon is definitely open to receive your questions via me or an email, and we will provide you the answers. We being her, really. But okay. So the Summer Career Accelerator was designed to address loss of instructional time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For our middle school, we're going to offer a partnership with Startup High, which will be a one-week sessions that will have 15 students in each session. These students will complete interest inventories, develop a career development plan, and through the Startup High, be immersed in local business to increase their entrepreneurial mindset. Sorry, got stuck there. Orange Engineering and Design Academy and Project Lead the Way at Orange High School has been hit hard by COVID-19 and the loss of hands-on project-based learning. So in partnership with Durham Tech, we are still finalizing the details of our current juniors participating in a 2-week summer camp on Durham Tech's campus in their makerspace. A 9th grade camp at Orange High School in the PLTW classes will also be offered to incoming Academy students. These details are also still being finalized. Summer Careers Academy in partnership with Chapel Hill Carver City Schools will be on the campus of Cedar Ridge High School for the classroom component of the program. These 20 students will be hired and working with local businesses Tuesday through Thursday of each week, and this program will run June 14th to August 5th. And finally, as part of the Career Accelerator, we will begin offering summer paid internships with Orange County Schools as a Grow Your Own initiative. Our 2 career development coordinators and the school counselor at partnership will be hard at work matching students to internship opportunities in our school system. We will continue to identify Orange County school departments that are willing to take on student interns for the 120 hours of CTE internship classes. So we will take any questions and we will try our best to answer them.
I think we might need to save our questions and email them in.
Correct. So I apologize but thank you so much for the presentation.
Of course, thank you all.
Thank you.
So,
Motion to move into a closed session
second. Do I need to repeat the statement?
For the reasons cited in the earlier motion.
for the reasons cited in the earlier motion.
A motion from Ms. Smiley and a second from Ms. McKenzie. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.